Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm so happy to see all of you here. So, before anything, I know that you are here because either I have coached you before, I've met you in tournaments, or we've met each other in tournaments, or you're acquainted with somebody that has received the link as well. So, I'm so glad to see you all of here. So, before we start, I just like to orient you guys on what will happen on this boot camp. So, this will be very chill, so don't worry. Hold on, I'll just share my screen. Okay. Okay, so is my screen visible? Hello? Okay, so as previously mentioned, this will all be on Zoom and Discord. So I'd just like to orient you on some changes. So there's a popular demand to include more lectures, so I included more lectures here. And that's why the schedules were a bit reshuffled. For day one, we will have 4 lectures in the morning, and this will be framing, structural reasons, first speaker speech structures, and intros. For PM session, we will have demonstrating, rebutting, and weak speech structure. So on day two, that's when we will have the core debate and other common debate frames. And on PM as well, we will have somebody else over, my debate partner, and she will be talking about deputy speech structure and closing strategies. So you might wonder why the deputy member and reply speech structure is on a different day compared to the PM and the whip speech structure. That's because the person who will be doing this lecture is currently at her job and she's working. So I asked her to take a day off, and this was her only available day. So that's why that's the way the schedule is. So on July 24, we will have judging and online tournament advice for the AM session. So I hope that's all clear. We will have more lectures than what was initially said. So I hope that's okay with you. And I hope that it's not all too information overload. But I promise that we'll make the lectures as concise as possible, but still comprehensive. So this debate bootcamp was initiated because of multiple reasons. Firstly, because I acknowledge that it's quite difficult to access comprehensive debate materials and lectures, especially if you don't have dedicated coaches in your institution. So that's why we're doing this as well. Second is that there are a lot of upcoming tournaments like BUBP for regionals and also Nash DC, which will be on August. So I know that everybody should be updated with the current debate meta, especially with the current matters and motion teams or the questions that you likely have to answer in your debate speech per motion team. So that's why we're doing this as well. Thirdly is that I haven't been coaching for a while now. So it's been a year since I left coaching because I had to pursue med school, and I really missed teaching and coaching. That's why we're all here as well. So, I don't think I've introduced myself to those who don't know me. So hello everybody, I'm Burst. I'm from the UP Manila Debate Circle. I've been debating for 7 years, and yeah. Currently I'm doing med school and PhD as well in UPM. And yun lang. Before anything, I also like to say that we're recording this lecture. So for people who are not able to join us, they could see it, and this will be uploaded in the Discord channel as well. Second, if I have coached you before, some of the PowerPoints will be the same ones I used before. So if you already know that, then that's fine as well. And but there will be new materials as well, especially on day two, because these are new things that I want to discuss and I think are very important for you guys to debate. Thirdly, is that kindly ask a lot of questions. I appreciate people asking questions, no? So don't wait for me to end the particular lecture. You can ask questions right away, and that's fine. Because you might forget your questions if you still wait. And also to keep the flow of the discussion flowing, I think it's better if you guys ask questions here as well. Okay? So guys, don't be shy. I may seem intense sometimes in person, but I promise you I'm very, very chill. Okay? So does anybody have any question about what will happen throughout this whole debate bootcamp? We will also be sending e-certificates to everybody who attended through email after the 3 days. Okay, so with that said, I'll just go ahead and screen share already. So the first lecture that we have will be about framing, and I made this illustration to make it clear what framing is, because I know that a lot of newbie debaters don't know exactly what frame is, or they have a vague idea of what it is, but it isn't really clear to them as to what a frame entails and when should you frame, what does a frame look like. So here I made this illustration. So I want to emphasize that the frame is the summation of everything in your speech. It's the grand strategy by which you want your speech to convey into the round. So it's the summation of everything. So as you can see here, the frame includes the context, the model, and the policies and the counterfactuals or the comparatives you want to make. The frame also encompasses the rebuttals and the levels within that rebuttal, and the frame also encompasses the arguments, the levels within the argument, and the structural reasons within those levels of the argument. So I want you to appreciate how frame is the all-encompassing thing for everything in your speech. So it's the grand strategy. It's the lenses by which you want the judge to appreciate your speech. And I will be demonstrating that later. And I also want to emphasize that the frame doesn't just extend to the content of your speech, it also extends to how you deliver your speech. So the nonverbal theatrics you choose, the emotions that you wish to exude in the speech is also part of the frame because you want the judge to buy it that way. Also, the choice of words, the materials that you choose to run, the way that you package those sentences and those words are also parts of the frame. So the frame is the everything, the summation of everything in your speech. So I hope that's clear. Okay, so most of this material is already in the Google Drive that I sent to a lot of people before. If you don't have that yet, I'll send it later. But you don't have to take so many screenshots because this will all be there anyway. So you can just find it. Okay, so I hope it's clear that the frame is a summation of everything. Now I'll just give me a sec. So now we'll move on to the framing lecture. Give me a second. Okay. Ayan. So is my screen visible? Okay, because I want to be able to write. It's, ayan. My God. Okay, so now let's move on to framing. So earlier, I just wanted to appreciate how frame is a summation of everything. Now, really, what is a frame, right? So frame is not the model itself. No, it's not the particular policy that you want to run. Rather, it's the lens by which you want the judge to view the debate. And its job is to be able to brainwash the judge or condition them to use the standards that you want them to use to judge the round. And of course, these standards will be biased to your side. And the frame essentially is the side or the paradigm plus the value or perspective. And it talks about what the judge should care or appreciate in the round as true and has the power to decrease the value of arguments. So I know it's quite confusing. So let's deconstruct everything. Number one, the frame is not the argument itself. It's also not the policy itself. Rather, it's the summation of everything. Number two, the frame is the lenses by which you want the judge to see the round. So think of it this way, right? So it's the coating or the lenses by which you want the judge to see the round with. And if the judge sees the round this way, then you guys, your arguments will be much more appreciated by the judges. So for instance, the government frame is the green lenses, right? And the opposition frame is red lenses. So the government team wants the judge to view the round in this way. So this is the round. It's, as you can see, it's brown. But if the judge wears the green lenses, which is the frame of side government, then the round would look this way. And this is the ideal debate for government because this is the conditions by which all their arguments would be appreciated to a great degree by the judge. Conversely, the opposition frame would be something like this. They want the judge to see the round in a red way. And of course, this debate will now look like this because you are putting red frames. And now, this is the ideal opposition debate. This is the debate that would really highlight the arguments of opposition. So essentially, the debate is a battle of which team is able to make the judge see things in a way that favors their team. And with that, that's the clash. Because Gov wants the judge to see it this way, Op wants the judge to see it that way, and now there's a clash in the round. So how do you win the round? Right? Two ways. Number one, you convince the judge that your frame is the most logical, reasonable, and most correct one. So that's the first way you can win the round. And the second way that you should be doing to win the round is engaging on the frame of the other team, telling the judge that even if this is the frame that sells to them, you would still win at Gov. Or even if this is the frame that sells to them, you would still win at Op. So you need to engage and play at the terms of your opponents and still prove that you're able to sufficiently win the round. Okay, I hope it's clear. I hope that that's clear that this is what you want to do as frame. As to how you frame and what a frame looks like, we will discuss that later. Okay, so I just by this point of the lecture, I want you to appreciate that frame is a summation of everything, all the arguments, levels, policies, non-verbal things, choice of words that you want to run in your speech. And second, in order to win the round, you need to convince the judge that your frame is the right one, and you also need to engage on the frame of your opponents and win on their terms. Okay, so all of that is now going to decrease the value of the arguments on your side and also decrease the arguments or the value of arguments on their team. Okay? So some things that you have to consider when you're framing. Number one is burdens. What are the questions that you need to answer in the round? What are the things that you have to bite in the round in order for you to win? Stakeholders. Who are the people that you should champion in the round? What is this round about and who should this round serve? Who are the most vulnerable actors? Moral framework. Is this like what's the principles that you need to fight for? What's the moral high ground that you have on your side? Okay? So some things to consider while framing. Firstly, in terms of burdens, you need to explicitly, and I take note of this, explicitly tell the judge what your team needs to do to be able to win and what the opposing team needs to do to be able to win as well. So here, you're telling the judge what your win condition is, and also you're also burden pushing the opponents to be able to do something so that they will win the round, right? So it's a burden push and also a declaration of your win condition on your side. Let's illustrate. In this motion, in areas with significant amounts of illegal trade and production of drugs, this house believes that the state should legalize aggressively producing and selling drugs. So siguro this is like Colombia when there's a rampant drug problem. So it's now the state that should sell and produce these drugs instead of drug lords, etc. Okay, so your frame now in Gov in regard to burden is if Gov proves that legalization and aggressive production and sale of drugs is the only way to regulate the drug problems in these areas, then we will win the debate. For Op, they need to provide a more efficient alternative. Okay, so as you can see, the win condition of Gov was clearly stated. They said that if it's the only way talaga to be able to solve the drug problem, then Gov should win. But they also burden push up that they need to prove and give us an alternative. What is the alternative to this if they don't want the state to be able to sell and distribute drugs? What's the alternative? So that's the burden push that they want. And that's framing. That's part of framing because you're telling the judge that if Op doesn't do this, then they should lose. And if we do this, then we should win. Right? So it's a strategy. It's part of the frame. Whereas Op can say something like this. Their burden is not to provide an alternative. Rather, they only need to prove that the current status of these areas will be much worse if drugs are legalized, aggressively produced, and sold. So, diba, like, notice the frame of Op. Now, no, it's not our, since they understand that providing an alternative is a difficult thing in this particular motion, they will frame it in a way that we don't need to provide an alternative. We only need to prove you why it's worse if we do the policy of Gov. So I hope that you can appreciate that this is like mind games, and this is like any technique of persuasion that you can use to convince the judge to side with you, and that's all framing, right? So I hope that's clear how it like framing manifests in terms of burdens. Next, in terms of stakeholders, you want to ask yourself, who are the people you want to protect and why will they experience better outcomes on your side? And why are they deserving of that protection? So this is about vulnerable actors. Why are these people more likely to be better off on your side? I.e., that's pragmatically, but also why they're deserving of that protection. So in principle, why do these people deserve to have this kind of policy, to have this kind of protection, etc. So motion, this house would criminalize red tagging. Government can say that criminalizing red tagging is the best way to protect activists whose lives have been endangered due to red tagging. Diba? So the frame is that strategically, this is the best way to protect them. And principally, they have already been in such strain for so long, and that's why they are deserving of protection, even if it means that we criminalize red tagging as a whole. We go to that extreme. Opposition, on the other hand, is and will say that criminalizing red tagging is not targeted and only penalizes citizens who are victims of state propaganda. So they're now saying that it's not targeted. It's only like it's going to cause friendly fire. It's not going to like you're only gonna punish people who have already been brainwashed by the state and not really targeting the people who are spreading fake news or at the core of that misinformation campaign, right? So their strategy now is then they're protecting the people who will be victimized because they've just been victimized by the state and now you're imposing another punishment on them because they don't know any better. So that's the frame of opposition. Okay, so I hope it's clear how stakeholders can also be framed a certain way. Notice, guys, Hannah, these are not arguments. As you can see, these are not arguments inherently. These are frames or the strategy, the overarching strategy you want the judge to see the round. Oh, why did I stop sharing? Sorry. Okay. So these are not arguments per se. These are the lenses by which you want the judge to see the round. And of course, if you want to run these arguments, you'd have to give them levels, you'd have to give them mechanism, etc. So we'll discuss that later as well. When you're framing, you also need to consider moral framework. So moral framework, so utilitarianism, like do we want to prioritize as many people as possible? Or are we more inclined to pursue principles? So for example, this motion, this house as a progressive Filipino youth would engage in disinformation campaigns to support opposition candidates for the 2022 elections. So in Gov, you can say that it's the interest of progressive Filipino youth to engage in disinformation campaigns because it's the most strategic way for opposition candidates to win. So they say that in terms of moral framework, your morality should lie on making good candidates win. And therefore, even if you need to do dirty things, then you ought to pursue those actions if the end goal is justified. So that's how the moral framework is framed in this particular frame. Whereas in opposition, they can say that no, it's not really in the interest of progressive Filipino youth. Because syempre, you're a progressive Filipino person, so why would you want to engage in disinformation campaigns? It's against the principles of yourself to lie to common man regardless of outcomes. So this is how morality and principle is framed. So you want the judge to view the round that way in a manner that tells the judge that your interest should be to uphold virtues at all times. Whereas Gov would want the judge to see that the interest should be the end goal, the morality of the end goal, not the morality of the action itself. So I hope that it's clear how morality and framework can be used. So just a short recap, no? Again, frame is a summation of everything. It's the lenses by which you want the judge to view the round. It's not the argument per se, it's not the context per se, but rather it's everything. It's the summation of everything in your speech. In order to win, you need to convince the judge why your frame is the most logical, but also at the same time, engage with the frame of the other team. You need to consider burdens, i.e., what are the things or the bullets that you have to bite on your round, and also what are the burdens that the opposition should defend for them to win. Next, you also need to consider stakeholders, who are the vulnerable actors. Pragmatically, why should they experience better outcomes? Principally, why are they deserving of those kinds of actions? Next will be moral framework. You need to prove why something is morally just and what are the moral lenses by which that judge should view the round. Okay? So all in all, the frame's goal is to be able to convince the judge to be able to side with you because they're going to be able to make your arguments more convincing and the arguments of your opponents less convincing. So, in order to delineate what's an argument and what's a frame, let's analyze these particular examples. Okay, so here, is this a frame or is this not a frame? Does anybody want to answer? We want to protect the most vulnerable actors, which are the poor and the marginalized. Frame or not frame? Anybody? You know, you guys are free to unmute if you want. Okay, so this one is not a frame because this is just the neutral goal of the event, like of the speech, right? Of course, all speeches would want to protect the poor and the marginalized. So this is very neutral. So it's not a frame because it's not biased to your side. Diba? Like let's review. The frame is something that you want the judge to view the round under a specific lens by which would accentuate your argument. So if it's just to protect the poor and marginalized, edi syempre hindi yun frame kasi everybody wants to do that. It needs to be strategic to your side as well. Okay, so next. Denying burial rights from individuals who committed crimes against humanity is the only way to uphold justice for the victims. Is this a frame or is this not a frame? Okay, guys, you know, just answer, like, just at the top of the head. You can just vote yes or no, actually, as well. Because, you know, like, it's okay to make mistakes. And this is just on, like, a very chill training boot camp. So that's fine. Okay. Okay, people are answering sa chat. Yes, yes. Okay, so yeah, it's a frame. Because you're framing that the only way, diba? Like the subtle frame here is that these victims of crimes against humanity deserve justice. And the only way you can get that pragmatically is denying the oppressors burial rights. So it's a frame. So because it's biased to your side as well, but also it's not an argument because it doesn't have levels or mechanism, etc. Okay. The burden of opposition is to respond to our first argument. If they don't respond that, we win. Is this a frame or is this not a frame? Frame or not a frame? Okay, people. Frame, not a frame. Okay, so of course this is not a frame, right? Because it's neutral. It's neutral. It's not really like it doesn't like of course like dapat lang na the other team should respond to your argument, right? So in order to make this a frame, like you need to say that no, the burden of opposition is to say why their alternatives are better, or their burden is to prove why even if these poor people are already suffering, why should we wait for long-term solutions? Mga ganon, di ba? It needs to be biased. It can't be just like a thing that's already assumed. So it's the same as this one, no? Na, for example, like the first example, we want to protect the most vulnerable actors. Edi syempre, like you guys should protect vulnerable actors. That's the point of the round. So in the same manner, you can't say that this is a frame because of course then the other team should respond to you. Otherwise, they really won't win. Okay? So next, we will heavily increase social media regulations on fake news, hate speech, and other directly harmful campaign strategies. And we will also partner up with the Commission on Elections and ask them to approve campaign materials in social media. Is this a frame or not a frame? Okay, so no, this is the model and the policy. So guys, I get why it's kind of confusing. And this, like, I know that this is quite a confusing point, especially for newer debaters, or even people who have been debating for a long time, right? So di ba sabi ko kanina na, oh, why did you say earlier that the frame includes policies, models, counterfactuals, arguments, rebuttals, etc. So in essence, then the frame should be everything, right? But no, what I meant was that the frame is the overarching messages, the overarching key insights and messages of the frames, policy, counterfactuals, rebuttals, not these particular components themselves, right? So here, this is the model, but So this is just the model. It's not a frame, right? So perhaps the frame here could be something like, we need the help of commission on elections, or it needs to be a collaborative effort for everyone to have good outcomes. So maybe that's the frame. But the policy itself is this one, right? But the overarching message, that's the frame. So guys, don't be confused. Again, the frame includes the overarching messages and insights of every component of your speech, policy, arguments, rebuttals. It's not these components themselves, rather what these components, messages are in summation. That's the frame. Okay? So frame or not, this debate is about strategy because the feminist movement has always fought for tangible outcomes that allow women to have a better place in society, which will only happen if you don't antagonize potential allies. Is this a frame or not? Frame or not? Okay? Answers? 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 Okay, yes, of course it's a frame. Because tingnan mo to, di ba? Like parang it's saying na the feminist movement should not just be concerned about principles. Hindi pa rin prinsipyo lang. Kailangan may strategy din. So it's a frame because you want the judge to appreciate the round and see the round in a way that they will examine what is the best strategy. And since it's biased to your side, because probably the other team is more principle, and you is like more strategy. So it's also good for you as well. So that's nice. Okay. So again, a review now review that the frame is a summation of everything, but not the individual components. The frame is the key message of everything. Second, the frame is the lenses by which you want the judge to see the round. If your frame wins, then the judge will appreciate all your arguments more. And in order to win the round, you need to hedge against the possibility that the frame of your opponents is more benta. So you have to engage with them as well and prove like even if you play on their own terms, you will still win. The frames should consider burdens, stakeholders, and moral framework. Okay, the frame cannot be value neutral. So you can't just say that they need to engage to this, our first argument, or they need to protect vulnerable stakeholders because obviously that's assumed. But rather, the frame should be something that's really biased and has a lace of like a lace of bias that's favorable to your side. Okay, so as we I hope that you already understand, have a vague ideas, like at least of what frame is, or a more concrete understanding of what a frame is and isn't, and we will develop that understanding throughout the course of the other lectures. Okay, so does anybody have any questions on framing before we proceed to what's our next lecture? I think it's structural reasons. Yes. Any other questions? None po. Okay, thank you, Patrice. Okay, anybody else? Okay, no questions. So now I will open a PowerPoint. Give me a second for structural reasons. So now guys know that we know what what framing is. We now we will now apply our understanding of framing to the other dimensions of debate, like structural reasons. All the reasons have to have a frame because that's when you will be able to win. Like you can't just give structural reasons not um that is not really biased to your side. It needs to be biased to your side. Okay, so structural reasons. Okay, give me a sec. I'm just opening it. Share screen. Okay, it's visible. Ayun. It's loading. Anyway, ang bagal niya. So, any questions first? Any questions? So, um, I want to go back to this illustration again. I can't stress this enough kasi kailangan nyo talagang malaman to. As it has to be like really ingrained in your mind. Like this, right? So frame is the key insight of everything. Again, sorry pa ulit-ulit, pero repetition breeds familiarity, and familiarity breeds more understanding. So a frame is a summation of everything: context, model policy, counterfactual, rebuttals, even the choice of words. But it's not any specific thing. It's the it's the it's the overarching message of everything. It's your strategy to win. The one the one the one by which you want your judge to view the round. Okay? So think of it this way, guys. Who here has seen Inside Out 2? Inside Out 2. Okay, I think just like did everybody get the chance to watch that movie? Okay, so in Inside Out 2, diba? Like the core memories or the memories, once the emotions float them to the lake, they form a belief. And then so the belief is the summation of all the memories. So if your memories are always good things with your like with yourself, then your belief will be that I am a good person. So in essence, the arguments, the models, the counterfactuals, the choice of words, they're all those memories. And the belief is the overarching thing that you form once you combine all those memories together. So that's the frame. So the frame is also the belief. It's the belief. It's the thing that you want your judge to be sold at. So if your frame doesn't fly, it's difficult for you to be able to win the round. Okay, so somebody asked a question. How much time do we invest in framing? Number one, framing is not any particular thing in your speech that I'm dedicating this particular part of my speech to frame. No, rather, framing is in every single thing that you say. It should echo throughout your arguments, throughout your context, policies, etc. So, to answer that question, it's not a particular compartment or pocket of your speech. Therefore, there should not be a specific time allotted to it. Rather, it's like a thing that you should be constantly doing all the time. So the frame should be laced on top of context, choice of words, so that it will be biased to your side. So I hope that it's clear. Okay? So I'll explain further later. I hope that. Oh, ayun. Ano na siya, nag-load na siya. um, let's see. Share screen. Okay. So, is my screen visible now? Okay. Okay. So, first, let's understand what are structural reasons. Kanina we talked about frames. Frames being the overarching thing of everything. Structural reasons are more on specifics. These are specific things that explain why something is likely or unlikely to happen. So essentially, explains why your arguments are likely to be true or why the arguments of your opponents are unlikely to be true, right? So often, these are just other debate elements repackaged under one cohesive line of thought that justifies the likelihood of a certain claim to materialize. So let's deconstruct this. Other debate elements. So they can be contexts, they can be interests or whatever. So since most of you guys, like all of you guys here, like have debate experience already, because this bootcamp isn't really designed as well for people who don't have a debate experience, because then we'd have to explain the formats, the rules of debate, etc. But rather, since all of you here, and I know most of you already have debate experience, like you know the like interest, context, etc. So these are the structural reasons then are just those elements that are repackaged in one cohesive line of analysis. So that explains why something is likely or unlikely to happen, or why a certain claim is likely to materialize. So I hope that's clear. So why are structural reasons important? Diba? Reasons, they're just reasons to prove why something will happen. It's important because they draw the line between debating and simply asserting. A person without structural reasons is just asserting because there's no way to know whether the claim is going to be true or not. Rather, a person with structural reasons will sound like the logical person in the room and will really be credited as a person debating because there's a significant amount of effort poured into proving why something is true or not. So a debater who has structural reasons will appear like the voice of reason, whereas a debater without structural reasons will appear irrational because it just feels like they're asserting their claims. And they will just be accused of over-relying on motherhood statements. So I'm sure that all of you might have been familiar with the feeling of being tagged as a debater, relying on motherhood statements without expounding anything. So maybe your judge has told you that feedback, maybe other debaters in that round have rebutted you and told you that you're just relying on motherhood statements. So in order to not have that kind of thing happen again, we're going to talk about structural reasons. And I know that I've given this lecture to some of you before, but it's one of those lectures that's really basic and you have to master all the time. So it needs to be reiterated in your brain, so you don't forget it, and your skills in structural reasons don't become rusty. Okay, so in average level debate rounds, no, siguro in a normal round, in a tournament, whatever, there are plenty of good ideas that do not sell just because they're not supported of structural reasons. So debaters are smart people. They will think of good ideas, but a lot of times, no, it doesn't sell. It doesn't feel credible. It doesn't feel like we should be buying those ideas because there's no structural reasons. Like, ba't ako maniniwala sa something na hindi naman approved, right? So in high level debate rounds, so siguro this is going to be like top rooms ng nationals, ng collegiate nationals, finals, break rounds ng international majors, or even really finals round ng mga regional majors. No? There are plenty of so-so ideas that sell just because the debaters are good at supplying structural reasons that make the ideas feel grounded to reality. Diba? So the ideas itself, it doesn't feel so nice, right? But they bend us so well because the debaters are good at making it feel like it's a real thing and it's grounded in reality. So in parallel, like in parallel, no, parang imagine that in a normal debate round, there's so many diamonds, but the debaters lack the skill to refine the diamond, so it doesn't feel nice, or it doesn't feel marketable to the jeweler, which is the judge, right? So I know that all of you guys here, and since I've met some of you in tournaments, right? Parang I tell you na this idea that you could have ran, or like this idea that you ran, was genius. It was perfect. You were amazing because you thought of this idea, but the idea wasn't fleshed out enough. And as a result, I wasn't able to carry it to a fullest extent as the judge, right? And that's because you guys don't give enough structural reasons. And the structural reasons maybe some of you gave were not framed in a biased way that's very gonna boost your arguments. In contrast, no, a lot of debaters, a my idea can be good if you're good at structural reasons. So what am I saying, right? Let's go to examples because I know it's hard to imagine. So let's go to examples. Why are structural reasons important in making claims? So these are two debaters, no? These are debater one and debater two. Debater one said that capitalism is the reason why people are systematically entrenched in poverty. And then debater one dropped it at that. Debater two said that capitalism is the culprit as to why there is a global decline of mental health because of three structural reasons. First reason, capitalism breeds a culture of envy and subtly shames individuals for not having the latest luxuries. Second reason, capitalism enforces a harmful work culture that places emphasis on a never-ending grind as opposed to a more harmonious work-life balance, i.e. the 996 culture in China, wherein people work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. for 6 days a week. So 12 hours work day in 6 days a week. And third structural reason, capitalism has led to the rise of metropolitan cities with high population densities and unconducive living conditions, since financial opportunities are often concentrated in urban spaces, thus leading to a decline in mental health. Again, debater one said this and dropped it at that. Debater two said that capitalism is the reason why mental health is bad and gave structural reasons. Among the two arguments, no, which one has a more powerful motherhood statement? Powerful motherhood statement. Any answers? If you're shy to unmute, just chat. That's fine. Any answers? Motherhood statement. How we're just looking at the motherhood statement, the core idea. Which sa debater one ba yun or sa debater two? Which of them has the better core idea? Okay, guys, just don't think a lot about it. Just like core idea, guys. Core idea. Motherhood statement. Motherhood statement. How we're not talking about anything else. Just the motherhood statement. The core idea. Okay. So some people said too, and I know it's quite confusing. But okay, so the correct answer is debater one, because tingnan mo yung idea niya. Capitalism. Siguro, di ba, like, the goal of the debate was to paint capitalism in a bad light. So your frame is capitalism is bad. Capitalism is evil. Yan yung frame mo. So now, the frame has to be applied in the arguments and the structural reasons, right? Debater one said, capitalism is the reason why people are entrenched in poverty. That's a very good motherhood statement. Ang kapal-kapal nun. It's so thick, so good. Whereas debater two just said, it's the reason behind the decline of mental health. And it's a good thing, it's a good argument. It's a good argument. But it's not as powerful as systematically entrenched in poverty. So in terms of motherhood statements, debater one definitely takes the cake, right? But now, which debater is more believable in their claim as a whole, in its entirety? Debater one or debater two? Okay. Any answers? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Debater two. You're right. Because debater two gave structural reasons. So kahit na, di ba, kahit na ang ganda-ganda ng idea mo, if there's no structural reasons, the judge is not gonna buy it. They're gonna buy the me idea with the structural reasons. So if opening government to entrenched in poverty, kahit na maganda yung idea, it's not gonna win because there's no structural reasons. Whereas if closing government gave a meh idea with all the structural reasons, they're gonna win. And I hope you appreciate the importance of structural reasons. Reasons that prove why the argument is likely to be true or not, why the claim is likely to be true or not, and now that will explain why this thing, your argument, should sell to the judge. And the frame, where does frame play in all of this? The frame is laced in all of it. The frame should be the resounding message of everything. So if the message is that capitalism is evil, ito na yung frame, like nagamit mo na siya in your argument na it's the reason why systematically entrenched. It's the reason why there's a decline of mental health. Diba? So it's the frame is the overarching thing. Okay, so why are structural reasons important then? No, so they can be used to build why something is also unlikely, right? So you can also use that to rebut your opponents that their argument is unlikely to be true because of these structural reasons. One, two, three. Because a counterclaim, so a rebuttal without any reasons, will likely be shallow, unpersuasive, or easily dispellable. Like, the opponents can just say, "Oh, they weren't listening to our speech when they said blah blah blah." Diba? Parang ganun lang. Your rebuttal is just gonna be water off a duck's back. It's just gonna be shing. But if your rebuttal also has structural reasons proving why the claim of the opponents is likely to be untrue, then you also will have a clearer rebuttal that's harder to shake in the round. Okay, so current debate meta. So meta, di ba, ano to? Most efficient whatever. I forgot what meta means. But di ba, it's usually used in esports. And in esports, meta is when there are specific strategies, specific characters, specific items that are just proven to make you better or more likely to win or increase your odds to win because these things are the meta, the good characters, the good strategies at this point of the gaming terrain right now, right? So in debate, we also have a meta, and the meta changes every time, right? So when I started debating, I was a grade 11 young high school debater. I was like 15 or 16. People did not have structural reasons in their speech. People were just saying like motherhood statements and they expand it as if it's a stream of consciousness. They're just gonna expand one singular line of thought in their speech and that's it. But now, as we all know, the current debate meta is number one, it's not only that you should have good arguments, you should also have multiple arguments because at the point at which one of your arguments get rebutted, you still have multiple paths to winning and you will still be appreciated by the judge. And the same way, the meta right now is more on structural reasons, to give structural reasons to prove why something is to be true. Because if you don't fulfill the meta, then you will feel outdated or you're not going to be in the palette of the judges. So the structural the structural reasons meta helps you because it's a means of overwhelming your opponent, no? Because a speech is now thick, makapal. Makapal yung speech if you have plenty of structural reasons, because you're also likely to get your opponents flustered, and thus you're able to take down they won't be able to take down your arguments properly. So imagine a speech with two arguments, three levels per argument, and then per level three structural reasons under those levels. That's so many things that your opponent would have to rebut. And since debate is a psychological sport, you need to psych out your opponent and make them feel like they're incapable of rebutting you. They will get flustered because you have so many levels, and they will be pressured to rebut your arguments properly. And what will happen is that either they will just rebut a few of your structural reasons and they won't be able to rebut everything, or they will be able to rebut everything but thinly and shallowly. So it will not probably stand in the eyes of the judge. So it's a means of overwhelming your opponent to make them feel like it's impossible to rebut you. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if your opponents think that they're already losing since they can't rebut you, in their mind, they won't be able to think of good arguments because they're already rattled and flustered. And that's when they will lose now, because their head will now be out of their game and out of the round, and they won't be on their peak optimum thinking condition. And that's when you will have an entry for victory. Okay, so structural reasons, apart from it overwhelms your opponent and makes them feel pressured and grants the self-fulfilling prophecy that they will lose the round, it's also a way to pressure you, to force you to think of more things to add in your speech. Because ayan guys, the current debate meta emphasizes quantity. And this is not to say that quantity in the expense of quality. But if you see the good debaters, really good debaters, they will have a lot of really good things in their speeches. And it's all backed up with structural reasons. So if in your mind you're conditioned to have structural reasons, then it's also pressuring you to add more content to your speech. So you're now more pressured to do that, and you will be thinking of more things during prep, during the speech, etc. It also serves as your anchors for grounding your claims to reality, so you don't seem as if you're just floating in the air and your argument is totally ungrounded. Because if it's unsubstantiated, then you won't win the round. Also, structural reasons are also easy points of recollection for the judge, right? So easy points of recollection, because they will just take note of everything. Okay, structural reason number 1, 2, 3. So if you compartmentalize your speech like that, then the judge will just take note, okay, 1, 2, 3. So in their OA, they will just say those things, and they will credit you more. As opposed to if you don't give structural reasons, the judge would have a hard time thinking why your speech was the most memorable thing. Rather, if you have an itemized list of structural reasons, then they would definitely give you the win, because then they would see or recall the contributions you have in the round. It's a sign of higher debating ability. Hold on. It's a sign of higher debating ability because you know now how to ground your claims. You're not just giving motherhood statements. And also, okay, so now, okay, guys, gets na natin, no? Na what structural reasons are that they are something that proves why something is likely, how they can improve your speech because we demonstrated this example, how you can also use them to rebut the claims of your opponents, what's their place in the current debate meta, how they overwhelm your opponents, they pressure you to think of more things to add in your speech, they anchor your claims, and it's easy recollection for the judge, etc. So now let's discuss what then are the types of structural reasons. Sorry. Okay, so as we discussed earlier, I hate that it's not loading when I scroll out. Anyway, so as we discussed earlier, no, structural reasons are other debate elements. Other debate elements are repackaged under one coherent line of analysis. So it can be an interest, a context, whatever, any debate, other debate elements. So I apologize that I wasn't able to discuss everything, like all those debate elements, because I have to trim a lot of the lectures because I want it to be really packed and really high yield. So some of these things I am assuming that you guys already have some idea about, like context and interest. So now the types of structural reasons can also be like this. So the first type is interest, no? So since the goal is to prove why an actor is likely or unlikely to do something, there's very strong merit in using their interest as evidence to support a potential path of action. No, so since the structural reasons just prove why something is likely or unlikely to happen, then you can use the interest of that actor, whether or not they will even be interested to pursue that action, whether or not they will likely be going to do that action or not, right? So here's the key questions that we need to ask. Number one, does the actor have something to gain if it pursues a particular action, right? So for instance, if US does this, will there be a gain for US or whatever? Next, does the actor have something to lose if it does not move in this particular way? So okay, so if the parent doesn't do this, will they lose the interest of the child? Will blah 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 blah. Diba? Like, will they have something to lose? Will there be a danger? Number three, will the actor be able to protect itself if it opts for this particular action? So if this action has some consequences or whatever, can the actor hedge against those consequences and still have safety nets? Or it can also be that will the actor leave itself at a more vulnerable position if it does not act this way? So will they have something to lose? Similar to this one. So these are the key questions you need to ask to analyze whether an actor will be interested or not to pursue a particular action. So, example, interest. No? This house believes that the European Union should build its own standing army. So let's deconstruct the motion first. No? European Union is basically the union of a lot of European states, not all European states, but a lot of them. It's a coalition for political and financial purposes, mostly financial, but also political. And um, the European Union does not have a standing army. Standing army meaning an army in standby to protect its own territories and its own interests, like an army with tanks and soldiers, etc. At best, European unions have armies of individual country and have the army of NATO. NATO, which is a military alliance of a lot of Western countries as well, but it isn't the same as the European Union's own standing army. And the threat is that this motion was set during the Russian encroachment in Ukraine, wherein a lot of EU states are also near Ukraine. So that's why this motion was relevant. Okay, I hope the context behind the motion was clear. So the argument, diba, like the frame, of course, the frame here is that EU desperately needs a standing army. Yun yung frame mo, diba? Tas the frame will resound in the arguments and in the structural reasons. So the argument then is that the EU should build its own standing army because there is an active threat of Russian encroachment. So Russian people or the Russian government want to encroach on EU. Russia, so in order for this argument to work, you need to prove why Russia is likely to invade parts of EU, diba? So you need to prove whether it is even a threat of Russian encroachment. So to prove that, you need to analyze why is there a likelihood of Russia invading parts of EU, and you will use structural reasons. Number one, Russia wants to project a tough and strong image in the international politics, so more countries are unlikely to show active resistance to Russian rule. So it's a way of preserving Russia's optics. They want to appear like the strong man of the international arena, so nobody opposes them. Okay, so that's the interest of Russia, why they're likely to invade. Number two, second structural reason, Russia has the interest to weaken EU by taking away its allies and trading partners, since EU has been one of the biggest and staunchest detractors of Russia. So apart from projecting a strong image, which is interest one, Russia also wants to weaken EU by stealing its allies, and they can steal the allies by encroaching in Ukraine and like whatever EU states, and that's gonna weaken EU, and that's in the interest of Russia because Russia is enemies with EU, right? So next, Russia has the incentive to steal resources from nearby EU countries, since the domestic Russian shores are not rich in ores and minerals that are essential for expanding their own weaponry, right? So they have the incentive to steal resources. That's why they need to encroach. Okay, guys, diba? Eto guys, no? This first interest, project a strongman image, you can see that they have something to lose if they don't project a strongman image, because then people will resist Russia. Number two, if they weaken EU, they have something to gain because they will gain momentum to beat EU and to usurp its allies. Number three, they also have something to gain by stealing resources because, of course, they want to steal resources because that's like how they improve their economy. So all of these interests are reflective of all these questions. So if you find yourself asking, how can I prove that the actor X will do such action? And you ask yourself this question, may something to gain ba? Something to lose? Will it be able to protect itself? Whatever. And that's when you will be able to have three structural reasons. So the way you would argue that in your speech is that first level, the EU should build its own standing army because there's an active threat of Russian encroachment. Russia is likely to invade parts of EU because of three structural reasons. One, two, three. Di ba parang ganon? The speech should be like that. And the structural reasons help your speech evolve faster because an absolute no-no is when your speech is just circular and it's not developing. The judges will not want that. It's going to be very bad if your speech is just saying the same thing over and over again. The speech should evolve, that the judges should have something else exciting to look forward to in the speeches, and structural reasons help you evolve your speech. Okay, so the next structural reason is also an interest. I have another example. So, I want to spoil you guys with examples so you see where I'm coming from. So, interest. This house believes that the Luman people should sell distributing rights to their cultural elements, i.e. textiles, patterns, and music. So Luman people, which is an indigenous ethnic group in Mindanao composed of 18 indigenous tribes like the Bagobos, the Blaan, etc. So they're all in Mindanao, mostly in the Davao region. And the motion is that should they sell distributing rights of their cultural elements, so their patterns, and then make it commercialized so that corporations can distribute and commercialize them. So opposition, this is one of your arguments in opposition. The Luman people will harm the purity of their culture if they sell these distributing rights because of these three structural reasons. Number one, their primary interest is to safeguard the culture handed down by their ancestors. Once it is bastardized by capitalist marketing, it is far more likely that the essence of the culture is traded for more palatable marketing elements. So their interest, as in principled interest, is handed down to them. Second structural reason, the culture of Luman people is martyr of their identity, and it is their best interest to preserve its purity, since their identity is constantly in danger of being erased due to urbanization and cultural genocide. So pragmatically, no, preserving their culture is also a means of preserving their safety, because once the identity is erased, it's also worse for them as well, because you can justify more erasure of these Lumans. But then lastly, it is against the interest of the Luman people for their culture to be turned into a cash cow by the very same people who kicked them out of their ancestral domains and who deputized killing of Lumans. So it's the same capitalists who ordered them to be removed out of their ancestral land so that these lands can be converted for commercial housing, commercial, etc., whatever. So all of these prove that in the interest of Lumans, these are the structural reasons why the argument should be supported in terms of interest. I hope it's clear, guys, ha? You really need to master this. Kasi, I promise that this will really elevate your debating if you really are good at giving structural reasons. Next, the next type of structural reason is capacity. Capacity, no? So oftentimes, the greatest tipping point that determines whether an actor is likely to pursue a certain action is its capacity or lack thereof to conduct the action in the first place. Sometimes, even if you're interested to do it, if you don't have the means and the capacity to do it, then you won't be able to do the action. So the action is unlikely to happen, right? So you need to ask yourself questions like, does the actor have financial resources, financial, money, pera, to pursue this action? Does the actor have enough social capital, influence, like as in uh, like a following, a dedicated supporter base, or capital to opt for this particular action? Can the actor shield itself from the potential risk, and do they have safety nets? So the capacity is about resources, pwedeng pera, pwedeng social capital and influence, pwedeng time. Time is also a resource. So basically, capacity. Are they capable of pursuing the action? And that's a structural reason that you can use. Ito, very relevant for high school seniors right now. This house would ban standardized testing in college applications like UPCAT, USTET, ASET, etc. So the arguments from Gov can say that standardized testing is highly unfair to the poor because the rich students have a disproportionate capacity to gain a significant advantage because of three structural reasons. So it's unfair to the poor, and then the rich people have an advantage. So three structural reasons. Number one, students from affluent backgrounds can afford to pay expensive review centers and personal tutors that will give them comprehensive insight on the things they need to do to ace the entrance test. So they have money to pay for brain train, to pay for whatever, right? And tutors that will help them. So they already have an inherent unfair advantage on that regard. Second structural reasons, students from lower socioeconomic classes sorry, unlike students from lower socioeconomic classes, rich students do not have to work or help their parents earn a living, so they have plenty of free time to review for the test. Time is also a resource, and it's also part of capacity. So since these rich people don't have to go to work to feed their siblings, then obviously they have more time to review and to go through and burn through lots of practice tests, right? Next, third structural reasons. Rich people are more mentally conditioned to take the test since they do not have external worries inherent to being poor, i.e., thinking if there's still food to eat tomorrow, worrying about school fees. So their mind is just more clear and they have more space to think about and focus their attention towards their review. So, guys, capacity can take two forms. It can be capacity to do it, while the actor is likely to have the resources and the ability to do it. But secondly, it can also be the inability to do it, the lack of capacity, such as like how poor people don't have time, etc. And the capacity can be financial resources, social capital, time, and it can also be mental capacity, right? Like the mental headspace to be able to do something or not. Okay, another example, capacity. This house opposes the involvement of celebrities in political campaigns during elections. So by the way, most of the motions I'm discussing here are motions that are actually set in nationals, in majors. So yeah, so like these are the things that you might need to expect in the future, right? So for this house opposes the involvement of celebrities in political campaigns during elections. So so Tony Gonzaga, endorsing BBM, mga things like that. So the argument involved, the involvement of celebrities is unfair to smaller and lesser known candidates such as Calyori de Guzman because they often do not have plenty of celebrity endorsements because of three structural reasons. Guys, notice I just want to reiterate, where does the frame come in this? The frame probably in this whole case, the whole case of government could be like um endorsing celebrity endorsements make the elections unfair. Tapos pwedeng ito yung argument mo. It's unfair to smaller and lesser known candidates and because of structural reasons. Number one, they don't have financial backers, so they don't have money to pay for the talent fee of celebrities. Number two, they have significantly lower number of volunteer celebrity endorsers since they are candidates with inherently less clout and they are therefore unlikely to appear on the radar of these celebrities. So di ba ito, financial resources, ito naman social capital since they're unknown. So people are unlikely to endorse them for free. Or that, number three, they don't have meaningful societal capital that the celebrities can co-op if they endorse these politicians. So these two are financial. These two are, sorry, one of this is financial and these two are social capital capacity. Okay, so I hope that's clear, no? How capacity can be used in that context and how capacity can be used as a structural reason. Next will be context. Okay, so I will discuss this later, pero in more detail, but I just wanna brief you guys through this first. Okay, context. Sometimes whether or not the actor will pursue a particular action is not dependent only on their interest and their capacity, but also in the circumstances in society that make that incentivize them to do a particular action or disincentivize them to do a particular action. And these circumstances in society are the context by which the actor navigates the world upon, right? So the context can be about pieces of circumstances in society. Again, pieces of circumstances. I can't write, but it's so hard. Basta parang pieces of circumstances. Anyway, so what I want to write, okay, pieces of circumstances. Okay, guys, so I hope it's clear, no? This is the okay, pieces of circumstances in, oh my God, what's this? Pieces of circumstances, that's the context. So they can be events in society. Like for instance, in 1986, there was people power, that there's already precedents to overthrow a dictator, mga ganun. Societal behaviors and cultures. In Filipino society, we value things like utang ng loob or concept of hiya, etc. In current societal terrain or criteria placed in pedestal, like for instance, like in Filipino society, people who have multiple doctorate degrees or like people who have higher education are more respected. So criteria placed in pedestal, or there's a pedestal placed on individuals who have a lot more money. They tend to get more respected in society. Or it can be past actions of significant actors, or it can be like, for example, China has been known to commit shady dealings in the past, like hacking, etc., which can explain why they're likely to do that in the future. Circumstances that paint urgency. It can be like oh, polar ice caps are melting or whatever, so we need to do extreme actions for climate change. Or it can be geographical location, like these two countries are close to each other, so that they're more likely to be good trading partners, they're more likely to be at war with each other, blah, blah, blah. So this, I would like to expand on a separate lecture tomorrow. But yeah, just so you know, these are contexts in society. Things that are circumstances in society can also be structural reasons. So example, um, for example, this house as a millennial will opt into freelance economy. The argument is that freelance economy brings more economic promise than a typical 9 to 5 jobs because of three structural reasons. Number one, there's a boom in the number of clients seeking for freelance services because there's a trend in the of trend of companies being non-committal to one service provider, i.e. smart telco hiring multiple layout artists as opposed to one PR agency. So this proves it's a context, no, that is in society. Like, what is the behavior of the teleco right now? What are their hiring practices? What's the things that they place in a pedestal? Like they want to have diversity, so that therefore they're non-committal. And therefore, since they're non-committal, that's why you would explain why a freelance economy, a freelance job would also land you more jobs, right? So next, freelance market can connect you to more clients that often pay you more and are usually inaccessible to your proximity, like foreign clients, because you can work online. So this explains, geographically, that geographically, since before, if you work 9 to 5 in your current locality, you probably won't be able to access Canadian clients or like American clients who will pay you big bucks in dollars. Whereas if you're a freelancer working in Upwork, for instance, Eddie, you will have to have these clients. So you'll be able to have these clients that are not necessarily in your proximity. So geographically, it's more advantageous for you. Letter C, third structural reasons. Freelance jobs force you to hone a diverse set of skills, which guarantees you more fallbacks in case of economic recessions. Because when you're a freelancer, you kind of have to be able to do everything, right? Because you don't have a specific person dedicated in your team for one particular job. You need to know everything because you're a freelancer. So that gives you a lot of soft skills, like you know how to edit, you know how to proofread, to copyright, whatever, or to market, like SEO optimization or whatever kinds of stuff. And that will help you in terms of economic recessions when there's a mass uprooting of people in jobs, like in pandemics, because you're easily able to transition to jobs that are more marketable since you have soft skills. So these are contexts in society that you can use as well. Okay, so wag na to. So again, recap, no? Interest and structural reasons. The frame should be carried over to everything. And in structural reasons, you can have a structural reasons that is built on the interest of an actor, why an actor is interested to do something. It can also be capacity, why an actor is capable of doing something. It can also be um, context, why the conditions and pieces of circumstances in society make an action favorable or not. Okay? So, however, all the examples that we showed here, tigi like kung interest yung ginamit nila, interest ng lahat, di ba? Capacity ng lahat, context ng lahat. So this is not always the case because in most instances, a good set of structural reasons is a mix of all types. It should have interest, capacity, and context so that you cover everything. For instance, no, this is the emotion. So let's read the info slide first. Free range parenting is the concept of raising children in the spirit of encouraging them to function independently and with limited parental supervision in accordance of their age of development and with reasonable acceptance of realistic personal risk. So essentially, free range parenting is more hands off parenting, wherein you allow your children to explore and become more independent without really micromanaging everything that they do and say. Okay? Whereas, in contrast, helicopter parenting is a style of parenting where parents are overly focused on their children and typically take much responsibility for the children's experiences and their successes in the and or failures. So helicopter parenting is when the parents really go into the nitty-gritty of everything that their children should do and should be doing, and they will feel like it's absolutely their fault when their children fail or mess up, etc. So it's a more tiger parenting kind of strategy. So I hope that the distinction between these two parenting styles are um, already clear. The motion reads, this house believes that minority parents should primarily practice free-range parenting as opposed to helicopter parenting. So a minority parent, like a black parent, a queer parent, or whatever, should practice more free-range over helicopter. So argument in Gov. So pag Gov tayo, then we're favoring free-range. So the more hands-off parenting. Minority children have to be raised under free-range parenting because they need to quickly learn how to be independent because of four structural reasons. Number one, the children may face discrimination and other forms of bigotry early on, and these require them to have some level of independence to face these adversities. Okay, so what is this? Is this an interest, context, or capacity? Huh? So we need to be hands-off as parents of a minority because they will face discrimination, and these children need to be able to learn how to navigate these discrimination and fight against this discrimination themselves. So is this a context, capacity, or interest? Again, keyword face discrimination and bigotry early on. Anybody? Chat lang. Correct. Context. Because the context is that society is evil and society is rude to black people and to minorities. And that's the context. It's a piece of circumstance. It's a value in society that's unfortunately happening and it's unfortunately true. Okay, second structural reason. The minority parents are often subjected to hate crimes and violent forms of discrimination, which means that they might have a shorter lifespan than an average member of a majority group. Lifespan. There's a time element. Is this an interest, context, or capacity? So I think dalawa yung answer dito. Kasi merge siya. Anything? Okay. Other answers? Yes, it's capacity and context. Because context, no, that people will be there to commit hate crimes, but also capacity. You will have a short lifespan. You might die before your child turns 18 because you have a harsh life and people are out to get you. So you won't have the capacity to guide them along in the future anymore. So you need to equip them with the right skill set right now and mentality right now to be able to endure all these things and have the best chances of success in life. Third structural reason, the minority parents often have to juggle plenty of jobs in order to make ends meet, which means that they will not be there all the time to protect their children. Hence, the children need to learn the ropes of life early. Okay. Again, element of time. Ano to? Element of time, capacity, correct. So you won't have the capacity to be there. Like you will work like 5 jobs to make ends meet because you're maybe like a black single parent. So, di ba, like you don't have opportunities that are afforded to rich white counterparts. So you won't be there all the time. Next, it's the parents' interest to raise independent children who know how to navigate a life full of societal bigotry because it will amplify their chances of success in life. Interest, context, course, interest. Okay? So I hope that's clear. This is interest, no? Okay. So Good job, guys. So just really, really quick, no? I want to do just one exercise. So motion, this house opposes the rise of of billionaire philanthropy. So billionaire philanthropy is when billionaires donate a lot of things to charities, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, or like Villar, like donating housing to some poor people in the north, etc. Stuff like that. So billionaires donating money. So Gov argument could be it is hypocritical of billionaires to hide under the guise of philanthropy, but at the same time contribute extensively to the entrenchment of society to poverty. This is true for three structural reasons. Okay, so give me three structural reasons, like anybody lang, just at least one structural reason per person. You can voice, you can chat, whatever you prefer, that explains why it's the billionaire's fault why we are entrenched in poverty. Diba? So parang in order for us to prove the argument na it's hypocritical of them, it's hypocritical to then we need to prove why they are the reason behind poverty in the first place. And we do that with structural reasons. So anybody wants to share an idea? Hindi pa rin, like hindi kailangan super well thought of na argument. Just like on top of your head, a line of analysis or a line of thinking that you might want to pursue as a structural reason for this. Okay, chat. Okay. Foundations are being used for tax exemptions. That's correct. So yeah. And anybody else? Maybe something more direct na parang how billionaires talaga cause poverty. Yes, Aponce.
Okay, coach, I'll just try. But like off the top, I like the reason why it's hypocritical for business to hire the guys of philanthropy are for three structural reasons. One, no business is ever ethical because of the fact that like intrinsically business actually like utilize the suffering or like the like I guess the oppression of others in order to benefit. Two, most billionaires usually outsource their businesses to other countries or other like what's it called or like in like sorry I'm like running on like 3 hours of sleep and I'm currently doing like upcut
That's fine.
review tests. But yeah, like second, most billionaires usually outsource their work or their manufacturing to countries that employ child labor or slave labor. And three, most billionaires actually support or continue what's it called policies or even support policies and lobby for policies that's it called continue to perpetuate like poverty, to perpetuate like restriction of the marginalized, etc.
Thank you, Ponce. Very good, right? So let's analyze what Ponce said. The first structural reason was that it's hypocritical since it's the billionaires who are actually like causing the poverty and exploiting poor people, such as like for instance, we can say that it's the billionaires owning great grand real estate projects that kick out humans from their ancestral domains, that dislocate poor people from their old communities. Second, like it's the like a lot of these billionaires employ people from countries who are also using child labor. So that's correct. Like the tobacco industry, a lot of child labor there, sweatshops in Bangladesh, the cacao and chocolate industry, makeup industry, whatever. It's like lots of child labor. So that's correct. Thirdly, is that also a lot of times, these billionaires are lobbying for policies that are anti-poor, such as opposing the raising of the minimum wage, opposing the illegalization of contractualization, so stuff like that. So, okay, good job, very good job. So I hope that you guys get now why like what structural reasons look like, and you can say, and all of those structural reasons are interest, but it can be interest because or context because this is how billionaires behave and they're profit driven. That's why they do all of these things. Okay. So, okay. So anybody else want to try? Like I have another motion. This house would require quotas of minority candidates in judicial appointments, i.e. ensuring that there's at least X amount of female or black judges in court. So for instance, diba, like the Supreme Court in the US right now are mostly white people. In the Philippines, I think there's just one or two women in the Supreme Court justice. So it's very underrepresented. And these are people who are obviously not minorities and are obviously very privileged. So requiring quotas means that okay, at least 50% should be women, at least 20% should be black, at least 10% should be blah blah blah. Mga ganon. Okay, so this will the argument in Gov could be that this will improve the objectivity of courts and decrease the level of bias towards the majority of incoming up with court verdicts. So why will a more diverse court become less biased and decrease the level of bias in courts. So kahit na it gives three structural reasons, you can give, or kahit na one lang, it's okay. Anybody? But the voice or chat, guys, kahit na ano lang, it's just a guess, like, no pressure, just on top of your head. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Tracy. So, it will allow, if there's more diverse members, it will allow more intellectual discourse. And intellectual discourse, meaning that we have more perspectives that we can inject kasi there's more people. Okay, tama po. May isa pa, demographics. So when people have different identities, they have different perspectives. And if you have a collection full of all those perspectives, then you will have more objective middle ground for everybody in the court. That's correct. Anybody else? There will be less bias because more minorities in courts will mean that they'll be individuals. Okay, correct. So there's more likelihood that policies or interpretations of the law that are very racist will be vetoed out by a black Supreme Court justice, or like a judge with um a minority history or background, because they know what it feels like. So there will now be an active opposition and um counter narratives that correct those racist ideals. That's correct. So it's more objective. What else? What about you guys are good? You guys are doing it. Okay, so minorities will have a say in the important judicial process. So there's proper representation, and when there's representation, there's less bias because more perspectives are considered. That's correct. So you see, like you guys are doing it. What I'm telling you is that more minorities increase credibility. Correct. So what I'm telling you is that you guys know these things already, right? But I'm like literally like all the debaters I've seen, and I think I've said this to most of you, that you guys have good ideas. And it's already, but in your speech, it's so parang, it's so not coherent or arranged in a coherent manner. So I want you guys to practice, arranging it everything in a structural reasons. It's one, two, three, and it's all coherent. Because that's gonna elevate the packaging of your speech and help you really win good rounds. Okay? So ganun lang. So I just want you to think of the structural reasons and understand why they're important. What are the types of things that you can run? What are the questions you need to ask yourself to think of more structural reasons? Okay? So does anybody have questions on structural reasons before we proceed to our next discussion? Sorry, I'm eating. I didn't catch breakfast. Sorry. I woke up too early. Anybody else have anything? Any question? Kahit na private message sa Zoom. If you don't want to be ano. Okay. So with that said, let's take a 5-minute break. We will be back at 10:27. Just go grab a bite. But yeah. So if you have any questions, you can think of questions then. And then after that, we will discuss first speaker structures. And then this is also where I will discuss context. Okay? So let's be back at 10:27. If you have questions, feel free to do them in chat while we're gone. Thank you. Okay, let's go. Okay na. Hold on. Okay, so parang I hope that you guys were able to get your bladder break and everything so that we can proceed with the next lecture. Is my screen visible? My screen is visible, right? Uh, okay. Cool, cool. Okay, so recap on what we learned so far. Firstly, frames. Frames are the lenses by which you want the judge to view the round. And in order to win the round, you have to outframe your opponent. And second, engage on their frame. Which means that um, you also need the frame is the overarching key insight and key message of every component in your speech, as well as the nonverbal things like voice inflection and choice of words. Okay? Then we also talked about structural reasons, which are reasons that prove why something is likely or unlikely to be true. This can be in terms of interest, capacity, and in context. But the best kinds of set of structural reasons is when all of them are integrated. And there are questions that you can ask yourself, like, is the actor going to gain something, lose something, blah, 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 in order for them to pursue this particular action. And the frame should be laced in the structural reasons and in the arguments as well. The frame is not a specific part of your speech, but rather an overarching thing and should be echoed in everything. Okay? So it will now make sense now here in our lecture for first speaker strategies. And this strategy um, will be for PM and LO. Okay? So, preparing your speech. So here's the structure that I could recommend. Again, I know that all of you have your own different structures, but if you don't have a structure yet, maybe you can consider something like this, or you can also consider doing this first and then branching out and kind of putting your own spin and style into it when you have a better understanding of what it is that you want to build in your speech or what kind of debater you are, because your identity and your branding as a debater should also reflect your structure. But for those people who are still beginning, this is a good structure to begin with. Because what I don't like about parang other, diba, like when we're very new debaters, what we're taught as APM was that, oh, you need to like deconstruct the motion, you need to state the stakeholders, you need to state the policy. Diba? Tapos parang I think that's not the best way to teach like people, because number one, that structure is already outdated. It's not gonna win in like the current debate meta. Siguro in smaller IVs, but like in the big leagues, it's not gonna hold up. Secondly, that structure is hard to shake and hard to unlearn if you're already so comfortable with that structure. So when you already proceed to like bigger debate tournaments, it's gonna be harder to readjust and readapt. Thirdly, I think that structure doesn't incentivize debaters to really fully understand the entirety of their speech. Rather, they just be thinking about, oh, basta frame, policy, ganun lang, di ba? It's just very component heavy and not really the summation of their points and the summation of the things that they want to say, their strategy. So I think it's not like it's inefficient in terms of teaching people how to debate as a first speaker. And it also slows down prep so much because that structure is really very linear. So what I propose is some like a structure like this, and this is the structure that I use as first speaker as well. And I know some people use this as well. So again, your own style, you can do it, but maybe you can integrate something. Okay, so let's like we will explain. We will go one by one on every single component here. But just for the summary, we will have points of context here, which will always be the first thing that we say after the intro. And then next is, what is the world that our opponents have to defend? This is burden push. You're burden pushing them to defend a certain thing. And if they don't defend that, they will lose. The next is that, what is the world that we have to defend? So it's a declaration of win condition. It's also your like this is also where you integrate your model, because our world will look like this, our policy would look like this, in our world, this will accrue, blah, blah, blah. But also, you will then ito. And then next will be rebuttals. If you're LO, obviously if you're PM, you won't have rebuttals, but if you're LO, that's a thing. And then here, as PM, I would suggest two arguments, but with three levels each. And later, I will explain how every level is not really just a level. Diba? Like, kasi I think that the conventional understanding of levels is that, oh, I have one argument. My level one is my mechanism, like my mechanization. My level two is my examples. My level three is my weighing, right? But no, that's not the case. I think that it's more efficient if the level one, two, and three are actually three separate mini arguments. And each level will now have their own structural reasons. So, gets ba? So, hindi siya, so level one is not, like, these levels aren't just components of argument one, but rather independent and individual components in their own right, and should be defended by structural reasons in their own right as well. And you can just cluster the levels or mini arguments kind of sound similar to one another, and then under one argument you can put a banner. So okay, recap again. The conventional understanding of levels in argument is that you have one argument, your level one will be mech, your level two will be examples, level three will be weighing, some iteration of that, wherein the levels are essentially building blocks of that argument. And the levels are not self-sufficient because the mech is dependent on the example, the weighing is dependent on the mech, blah, blah. But now I propose that it's better that your levels are actually mini arguments in and of themselves, and then each level is a self-contained thing that doesn't really affect the other levels, such that if one level is rebutted, then these two other levels are still preserved and can still win you the round, right? So in essence, even though there are only technically two big arguments, the banner arguments here, you will have six mini arguments in your speech as a prime minister, because you will have six levels, where in each with three levels per argument, and then each level will have structural reasons to prove why the level is true. So remember our example later that na parang ano yun, like lumads, blah blah blah. Like yun siya, hindi yun siya argument, level lang yun siya. Tapos yung mga structural reasons, yun na yung under sa level. So I hope that's clear. So what that's gonna do is that in a very good round, you probably will have two arguments, three levels each, and then three structural reasons per level. So that's gonna be like what 18 structural reasons all in all, plus the context, plus everything. So that's gonna bombard your opponents and make them feel really threatened and rattle them and like make them feel uneasy and unable to defend their points because they need to respond to everything you say, and that's a big burden and big task to them. And that's gonna mess up their mind, and that's gonna make them really rattled and not have their best performance in the round. So, ayon. And then after that, after each level, no, after levels pala, you conclude. What did you prove in this argument? Why was this argument the most important or debate winning? And that's when you proceed to the next argument. Again, never proceed to the next argument. Okay, level 3, blah, blah, blah. Three structural reasons, blah, blah, blah. Argument 2, hindi pa rin ganun. I-conclude mo muna yung whole argument na to. So it's already, there's a sense of finality in the minds of the judge. Okay, recap. Intro, which should be written word for word. I will have a separate lecture on intros. Points of context, which are like I'll explain later what this is, but this is the first thing you think of in prep and the first things that should appear in your speech. Merong different versions nito. Like I know some debaters do points of interest or whatever, or but essentially like you can your own style, but like there should be like some context here at the start of your speech before you start arguing. Next is that burden push, which is also itemized. What is the world of our opponent that they have to defend? 1, 2, then ito declaration of win conditions and also model and policy. What is the world that we have to defend? Rebuttals if you're an LO, and then next argument, where the arguments have different levels, which are self-contained sub-arguments, and also the sub-arguments have their own structural reasons. And then you conclude that and you proceed to the next level. So if you're a PM, I suggest really 6 levels, 3 per argument. But also if you're LO, since you will have to consume time rebutting your opponents, and you will also maybe have to exert more time in recontextualizing, because you need to respond to them as well. Like then I think 5 arguments would do. I mean, I'm sorry, 5 levels. So like 3 levels argument 1, 2 levels argument 2. That would be fine. Okay? Promise guys, like as in mako-confused na yung kalaban nyo yan. How will they respond to all these levels? Like they're gonna be so overwhelmed, and you have lots of win condition if you do that. So let's talk first about what is your goal as a first speaker after your speech? What should have already been accomplished after your speech? Number 1 is that the frames and context of the debate should already be clear. It should already be clear what is the key insight of all your arguments, the key summation insight of all your policies and context. And also, what is the world that's happening right now? Why is this motion relevant? Why should we side with you? In terms of context, should already be clear. It should be clear to the judge what necessitated the debate to happen in the first place. Because the debate should be set because it's somehow relevant to society. So it should be clear in your speech already. It should also be clear what will the world look like on your side. Basically, your model and your policy. What does it look like, right? And also that it should also be clear that your opponents are already burdened to defend a stance that has been framed to be bad or disadvantageous. So I will discuss that later. So basically, the burden push should already be clear. And as the first speaker, all the intuitive arguments should already be argued sufficiently. Next, your context should have been translated into arguments, which I will explain later. These contexts that you have here should be translated into arguments and levels of your arguments. Okay? So you should be able to accomplish that as first speaker. And your opponents are now overwhelmed by 5 or 6 total levels of argumentation, and they will be confused about where to begin responding. And your closing, if it's a BP round, should already be flustered and should be confused about what else to run. And your deputy should have a clear opening for new arguments that make use of the context that you've already established. So again, as for speaker, you need to fluster the opponent, and your closing team should already be confused because they're already running out of things to run because you've already gathered them all. And the deputy should have a clear entrance using the context that you have already established. So I hope that's clear. Intro. So now, intros, which is the first part here, no, let's see, is a short statement composed of 1 or 2 sentences that introduces your main frame. So kunwari, yung main frame mo ay that capitalism kills lives. It is something dapat sa intro mo. Ay parang, every day, millions of people starve, suffer, and die because of greedy capitalists who fill their pockets with wads of cash at the expense of the lives of people on the ground. Something like that. Diba? Like, parang it already introduces the main frame. Like, what is the main strategy, the echoing, resounding echo of or sentiment or insight of everything that you're going to run? That should already be clear right from the intro. And the intro should be impactful and should evoke logic, emotions, or both. Again, I will have a separate lecture on intro this afternoon. So, but you have to remember, what I want to note here is that as a first speaker, your intro should be short. It should be 1 or 2 sentences because you have a lot of things to do. You have a lot of things to set up. And longer intros, no, such as 3 to 5 sentences, are reserved for middle to late game speakers like member, deputy, and even whip can have a longer intro because they have to do heavy reframing. No, at that point, super dami na nangyari sa round and they need to reframe a lot. So a longer intro is justified. But on your case, you're the first speaker, so there's nothing to reframe. You're probably the first person to frame. So don't do a long intro. And as the first speaker, your job is to introduce your own frame, and a short intro will suffice. Okay? Okay, I hope that's clear. So the bulk of your reframing in LO, no? In LO, kung LO ka, the bulk of reframing is best done in the points of context and rebuttals. So you're gonna insert all your reframing here and your reframing here if you're DLO. If you're LO. So don't invest the reframing talaga on the intro. Just keep it short and simple and introduce your own frame. And then dito mo na lahat ibuhos yung mga reframe. Okay? So most importantly, and this is the one thing I tell all debaters, I repeat over and over again, the intro should be written word for word before you start speaking. Absolutely do not try to wing your intro. Okay? Word for word. What is it? Why word for word? Diba? Like in debate, it's this incentivized na people write their speeches word for word because of course debaters need to be able to learn how to compartmentalize their thoughts and to make do with just phrases and headings. But in the intro, it's the opposite. You need to be able to write it word for word because number one, you're not like it needs to be perfect because it's the start of your speech. This is where people will form their first impressions of you and your case. Number two, if you stumble the intro, who here has experienced messing up the intro and then now they fumble through everything in their speech because they weren't able to regain the momentum? And it's a common mistake. It happens to the best of us. So in order to prevent that from happening, your intro has to be word for word, right? And even mildly rehearsed. Like you maybe like read your intro one time before you speak it sa podium. Because really, if your intro is good, it's gonna give you self-confidence and to proceed with your speech. And a lot of times, debaters need that to have that momentum. So that's it for intros. For points of like on the types of intros, on like how to intro, I'll discuss later. Okay, so in the points of context, and this is the main thing that I want to teach you guys, right? Which is the next thing beside intros. So points of context are definitely not arguments. So these are not arguments because they are not like they don't have mechanism, they don't have conclusion, they don't have weighing, they don't have structural reasons or whatever. And they must always be numbered. And this is true for everything in debate right now, or I would suggest if you want to be really palatable to the current debate meta, number everything. Like, 4 points of structural reasons, one, two, three, 4 points of context, one, two, three, 3 levels of rebuttals, one, two, three. Something like that, because it's easier for the judge to track your contribution and to not parang merge two contributions with one another, because the tendency is if you don't number, the judge will think it's one contribution, even if it's three separate contributions. So you need to be able to tell the judge and emphasize that these are three different things and you should credit me separately for it and their own merit. Okay? So again, these are events in society. Restricting forces, i.e., um, like there's a war there, so parang we can't go there, like there's no economy outflow there, whatever. Societal behaviors, again, utang na loob, hiya, things placed in premium, criteria placed in pedestal, like as in people want pe- people like certain ideals and certain values. Past actions, circumstances that create urgency, relationships, partnerships, conflict, geographical locations. So in actual motions, you can also um, um, try changing points of context with points of interest, but context can still be incorporated within the interest. So instead of points of interest, you can, points of context, you can use points of interest as well. Okay, so why are points of context important? Number one, they are framing devices. Framing devices. So, like I said, that everything should have their frame in it, but context is especially a useful tool to emphasize your frame, because notice how the points of context, should never be value neutral, because otherwise they will be useless. Okay, take note of this, guys. The context should be biased to your side. It should be leaning towards you, and it should bolster the arguments of your side and not just context for context's sake. For example, this this house would ban guns. So the bad value neutral context is that guns are both, so pag-gov ka, diba? So we want to justify being able to ban guns. So a bad value neutral context is that guns are used by both criminals and law enforcers. Criminals use it in the spirit of violence, while law enforcers use it to uphold justice. So, of course, this is a bad context, a bad point of context, because it's neutral. So why would we ban guns if both criminals and law enforcers use it anyway? But it doesn't make sense. The context has to be strategically chosen so that it fits the repertoire of arguments that you want to run, that the frame is consistent and it's there. In contrast, if it's a good biased context, you can say that thousands of people die because of gun-related violence, which includes incidences of school shootings, domestic conflicts, and recklessness of gun owners. Diba? It's a biased context because it makes the judge lean more towards going to gov and banning guns, because many people are being slaughtered unjustly and their lives have been ended because of people recklessness with guns, right? So this is not a value neutral context. It's a good context because it represents your side, unlike this one. So again, when you're choosing context, they have to be biased. They have to lean towards your side, because debate should be biased. If it's neutral, then it's just extemporaneous speech, or it's just like a declaration or whatever, which isn't our goal here. Our goal is persuasion, right? So it needs to be biased. Next, so points of context also serve as mind fuels. Mind fuel in a sense that it fuels your mind to think of more arguments in the long term. notice that points of context are easier to think compared to arguments, because arguments you have to think of mech, you have to think of actors, blah 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 blah, right? So it's easier if you think of points of context first. It can be the first thing that you hash out in prep. What is the context of the debate? Why is the debate happening? Why is this context biased towards our side? These things you can think of really quickly, because these are just events in society. So you can just imagine yourself being there and you can just look around you, and that's the context already. So points of context can be used as a starting point because it expedites the whole argument building processes. Your context then will now serve as the nebula of your argument. And they will, once your contexts are set, that's when you can convert them into arguments. And it's easier now because you know now you have a context now, so you won't be wasting time in prep. Moreover, context also mapping out context is important because it ensures that you do not miss out potential debate-winning nuances. Ang dami-daming debaters that they weren't able to explore a certain angle of a particular round because nobody was exploring, like nobody thought of the context in prep. They just, okay, but prep, okay, how do we argue? Arguments agad, diba? They thought of the arguments agad. And the danger of that is that, one, if you're so fixated with a single argument, all your other things that you will be thinking of will be under that same line of thought, which means that you risk the possibility that you're not able to diversify your arguments. And that's bad because number one, when your arguments are rebut na yun. Number two, like you don't have alternative paths to victory. And number three, it's easy for the closing team to extend because you're so linear. So you need to cover everything. And in order to make sure that you don't fall into the trap of just being obsessed with one central argument, then make sure that you map out the context first so you're not missing anything. And then you can convert everything into arguments later. Is that clear? So this means that, again, points of context should be the first thing you should be establishing during prep. As in, it should not be what's our first argument. It should be what's the context. First, second, third. Okay? I hope that's clear. Also, context also guides, like makes the frame consistent. Like a chance that the frame will be very extremely different between two speakers isn't really like very very good. Like even though the other person is extending, it should still resound the same frame, right? So the points of context ensure that everybody is aligned and like nobody has a different understanding of the motion and nobody's gonna run weird things. So it helps to rein you in the round. The next characterization. So we talked about how it's a framing device, how it's a fuel for the mind. Also, let's talk about how it's the law. Wow, batas, law. So the status of points of context make them more unlikely to be rebutted by the opponent because you frame these contexts as absolute truths and as universal things that your opponents should have to build their arguments around. Gets ba? Kasi the opponents will of course be inclined to rebut all of your arguments. But the difference is if it's a context and you frame it as though it's an absolute truth and that you guys should also be operating under this context, then it's harder now for your opponents because they have to build on uneven terrain. Since the context is biased, and now you're forcing them to like build arguments on that biased context, so they're gonna have a hard time, and that's gonna be bad for them as well. And they're far unlikely to rebut the context, which is it can stand. And when the context stands, at the end of the round, all the arguments that's congruent with that context will now be more valued by the judge. Okay? So now let's have a so again guys ano to siya. I also want to emphasize, sorry, I forgot. So not only is the context biased, no? Our context is biased. The other part should also be biased. Like this part, which is burden push, should be biased. The burden push should be hard to defend. You can't give your opponents an easy burden push. Like they need to really make it like a hard burden push, right? So conversely, on your side, you will also frame your world as if it's a good world. If it's a like in our world, this will be our policy, blah blah blah. We will have children who will be able to eat 3 times a day, blah blah blah, blah, mga ganun. So you frame it as if it's a good thing as well, so that in contrast, the judge now has the initial predilection already to side with you since you framed the opponents as bad and yours as good right from the get-go. Okay? So now we will delineate. Like, kasi I want to emphasize how contexts are different from arguments. Contexts are just the points in society. And I also, this will also serve as examples. Okay? So, context or argument. So, info slide, the term collateral refers to an asset like a real estate that a lender accepts as security for a loan. If the borrower defaults on their loan payments, the lender can seize the collateral and sell it to recoup some of its losses. So kunwari kung nangutang ka, di ba? So, if hindi mo mabayaran yung utang, isasangla mo yung bahay mo. So, the person who's lending you money now has a title of your home. So, at the point at which you're not able to pay it after a year, edi sa kanya na yung bahay, para quits na yung utang. So, in the same way, right, in the international arena, collaterals can exist. Like, if a country wants to loan from a particular bank or a particular other power country, then they can offer collaterals. Like, for example, if you don't pay after 5 years, you're gonna be able to have this island or this particular plot of land, blah blah blah. So the motion now is that this house this house should require collateral for bailouts. This house believes that IMF or the International Monetary Fund should require collateral for bailouts. Bailouts, this means tubos in Filipino. Like, for example, if you're already drowning in debt, another entity will save you, and now you will owe them instead. So they will pay your old debt, and now you will owe them instead. Okay? So I hope everything is clear. So here, you guys will guess if it's a context or an argument. So this countries that usually need bailouts are developing countries that have bad financial spending habits, that have debt trap from Russia and China or even other world banks. Which means they will be prone to things like debt trap diplomacy, and the spiral of interest will be too big and prevents them from loaning more, and they will be beholden from these countries. So is this an argument or a context? Okay, other answers? You guys can just chat. Okay. Okay. So the correct answer is context, no? Kasi hindi naman siya nag-argue, di ba? Like, hindi siya nagsasabi na why these countries deserve or do not deserve to give out bailouts or collaterals. It's just saying that who are these countries that need bailouts? These are countries like the Philippines or countries like Greece who have already succumbed to debt trap diplomacy and can no longer pay the interest and thus are already beholden to other countries. Diba? It's not arguing. Hindi siya nagsasabi na why countries should require bailouts or IMF should require bailouts or not, or why it's principally just or pragmatically good or whatever. It's just saying that it's a context. Like, what do these countries look like? Okay, so I want you to appreciate that this is what context looks like. It's characterizing certain things that is biased towards your side. So since you're Gov and you want to, diba? Should require like, since we're Gov and we want to require collateral for bailouts, it's our best interest to frame these countries as people who are unable to pay, who will no longer be able to pay us. That's why we need to require collaterals. That's why we put that these countries are already drowning in debt. Okay? So next, why is it good for IMF to have these kinds of bailout? Number one, countries are more likely to fix the debt. Why is it good for IMF if they're not if they're gonna require collaterals for the bailout? First, countries are more likely to fix the debt. They have an assurance they can recoup the loss, and the IMF can just sell the natural resources. IMF can also bail out more suffering countries in the long term, and IMF has more disposable income to bail out poorer countries. The comparative is that IMF will end up being bankrupt and worse in the long term if they don't require bailouts and if they don't require collaterals and if these countries don't pay. And even if the IMF does not go bankrupt, its financial integrity will be shaken to the point that they are unlikely to expend more money in the future to bail out other countries. And big economies also rely on IMF, which can also serve as collateral damage. So is this context or argument? Okay, other answers? Hey guys, just on top of your head, like, you don't have to like hyper analyze everything. Just like, guess me lang, ganun. Okay, so correct, this is an argument, no? Because the anatomy of an argument is fulfilled. It already has a comparative, meron ng even if, may structural reason siya. So this is an argument. right? It's not just a context. It explains why it's good for the IMF. Why pragmatica is a strategic thing for the IMF to do. Okay? So I hope that you understand the difference between context and argument. Next, um, the moral obligation of IMF extends to just helping one country. IMF is beholden to the greater global community, and it's created precisely to ensure stability of economy of the world. Therefore, it is obligated to make necessary sacrifices, like taking collaterals from other countries if it means having to prioritize the rest of the world. Is this an argument or a context? That the moral obligation of IMF is not just helping one country, it's helping the rest of the world. Argument or context? Okay. Okay, so I know this is quite confusing, but this is an argument. Pero gets ko naman na the line is thin sometimes, so it's I also get confused sometimes. That's fine. But this can be considered an argument because it already talks about the moral obligation. Like what is the IMF likely to do, right? What like what are the principles of IMF? Who is IMF beholden to? So the fact that it needs to make necessary sacrifices, even if it means sinking the other countries in debt first, if it means to prioritize the rest of the world, that's a principally good thing for IMF. So, guys, remember, pag meron ng mga pragmatic, moral, good, pragmatic strategy, argument na yan. Kasi nag-argue ka na whether that thing is good or bad, or principally wrong or just. Ang mga context lang is like what this looks like right now, what's happening in society, what's the precedents, mga ganun lang siya. Like, there's a recession, the spending behavior of this country is bad, mga ganun lang. Hindi siya necessarily na moral obligation, pragmatic interest, etc. Okay, so these developing countries who are likely to need bailouts usually have weak institutions. This means they have things like corrupt governments, they have multicultural segregation, and very poor democracy. This looks like the Philippines, Greece, and African countries. Is this a context or an argument? Okay, context. Okay, so yeah, you're right. No, this isn't arguing for anything. Wala namang moral obligation. Walang pragmatic thing. It's just framing that these countries look bad and are very unable to pay, right? You're priming the judge to think that the corrupt government will soon translate into your argument as inability to pay because they have bad financial management, right? So, but this in and of itself is not arguing. So this is a context. Okay. Next, the international community assigns less legitimacies to countries who are not able to pay off their loans. And this means that they have things like less respect in international voting blocks, and they're unlikely to inject capital into these countries as well. This is context or rebuttal. Sorry, context or argument. So it's just saying, Hannah, ito yung behavior ng international community. They don't favor countries who are not able to pay their loans. Any other answer? See, ito yung behavior ng ano. Okay. So this is a context. Gets ko na thin line ang argument and context, but this is a context because wala namang moral obligation involved dito. Walang principle, walang right. Secondly, there's no strategic whatever. Like walang impacts, walang whatever, di ba? Na parang, oh, what will happen if these countries look down on you? Like walang ganyan, di ba? It's just saying that like ito yung behavior. International communities will not respect you if you don't pay. That's it. But it's not saying na what does this disrespect look like? How will that impact the country? So it's not an argument. Okay. Ito. Why is it good for the countries that need bailout? They will have the urgency for government officials to prioritize the reinvigoration of the economy. Lands and resources are at stake. There's an incentive to weak democratic institutions to fix themselves, and otherwise they will get backlash. Is this context or an argument? Hey guys, chat your answers. Kahit DM lang if you're shy. Correct, it's an argument because it already has an explanation why it's the strategic thing. It's a good pragmatical thing for the poor countries, and there's an impact, etc. So this is an argument, right? Whereas this one, hindi, like wala siyang pragmatic thing. It's just saying na ito yung behavior ng international arena. So hindi siya argument in and of itself. Okay? Next. The IMF is the International Monetary Fund, is the government body or governing body run by the UN states, and their purpose is to provide assistance to economies. They earn from the interest of the loans, and they have to be financially strong to be able to bail out more countries. Is this an interest? Sorry, is it a context or an argument? Context? Who else? Who else? Okay, so obviously it's a context kasi it's just telling you, framing the purpose of IMF and not really telling you that the IMF should do this, this, and that. So, good job. Okay, so we're done now with the course. So I hope that it's clear ha. Pag walang pragmatic tie back as to why it's good for the actors, it's not an argument, it's probably a context. If there's no moral justification as to why something is ought to be done, it's probably an argument, a context and not an argument as well. And contexts are pieces of circumstances in society. You should think of them first during prep. It should be the first thing that you ask yourself, because that's gonna help you think of more arguments in the future as a mind fuel. It helps you cover all your bases so you don't become hyper fixated on a linear line of argumentation. It also helps you burden push the opponent to engage on an unfair and a biased premise to them so that they will lose, and yeah, etc. Okay, so what is the world? Like now I've already talked about this. So let's just recap now. What is the world that my opponents have to defend, which is the burden push, and should come after points of context, no? It's a burden push. You clarify the stance of your opponent so they're less likely to win with a soft stance. Ito pa, it's important to burden push because if you don't burden push, your opponent might dupang the debate, right? They might say something na it's not really true to the essence of the motion. So it needs to be really clear on your end what you expect the opponent to defend so that they don't make a soft stance and win on a soft stance. Okay? So you need to frame this in a bad light and highlight things that are, how is their world confusing and unreasonable? Okay. Their world, they're like in their world, the corporations or blah blah blah. Like, why is it unreasonable? Diba? Like in their world, the states will be the one producing drugs and distributing it near schools or like whatever, stuff like that. So how their world goes against moral principles, how their world is bad at achieving the goal, and how it's still impractical. And it's still numbered as well, like the what is the world that they have to defend? 1, 2. So it's still compartmentalized by the judge. Okay, so I hope that is clear. Next is what is the world that we have to defend? This part, no? It's also you have to clarify your model. It's a declaration of your win condition as well. Like why, how will you win? It give, like, you can put prongs of your policy, if any, like who will enforce this policy, who will how will this policy have safety nets, like who will vet these kinds of things before they go on to your policy, mga stuff like that, to avoid the opponents from dupang the debate, maybe making the debate dupang and like telling you na you don't give like us policy or whatever. So it protects you from being misrepped by your opponent, and you need to frame this in a good light so that in contrast you appear like you're the more reasonable voice of concern and reason in the round compared to your opponent, and should come after their model, or your should come after the burden push so that this looks nicer in contrast. Okay, so because you're gonna frame the burden push in a bad light, the next thing you say should be framed in a good light, and in contrast you're gonna seem like you're the nicer and more reasonable person in the round. Okay, so now we're already done with the intro, voice of context, burden push. What is the one that we have to look? We have to defend. Rebuttals is an entirely different lecture later. And now let's go on to arguments. Arguments. So either like arguments should be either 2 arguments with 3 levels each, or 2 arguments with first argument having 4 levels and the second having 6 levels at 2 levels. Basta yung total ng levels ng arguments, and you have 2 arguments, should be 6 levels if you're PM. So I would suggest you should aim for that. And if you're up, you can do 5 levels since Like I said earlier, like LO should still be able to reframe and rebut. So you have less time. So learn to strategically prioritize which argument should go first. If the debate is a strategy debate, then pragmatic argument can go first. If it's a very morally heavy debate, then a moral argument could go first. I'm not saying that you should just focus on one or the other. I'm saying that these things should still exist in your speech and coexist, like i.e. pragmatic and principle, but you need to analyze which should be ran first. Like what does the debate call for first? Okay? So what do you put in the levels, right? So the levels should not be the same with one another. So you can't have the same like level 1 and level 2 that are just reiterative of one another, because they should be diverse and should cover a wide base of the debate, right? Because otherwise your speech will not evolve. So what's the point of putting levels that are just the same? So when I say 6 levels, I actually mean 6 arguments arranged into 2 common themes or banner arguments. Like I discussed earlier, right? The levels are not subcomponents of the argument. Rather, they are self-contained sub-arguments that are each also defended by structural reasons on their own, and they're independent of one another, so that once the other is attacked, the other two can still bring you the victory. Okay? So what that means is that you can arrange them into 2 common themes. So what I do is, during prep, after na ng context, burden push, model, we just like think of random arguments. And then, so by may 6 arguments na kami, we will now arrange that according to themes. Like, okay, argument 1, we will put everything here that talks about the economy. Number 2, we will put everything here that talks about the environment or like the politics or whatever. So stuff like that, or like lahat ng mga macro argument 1, lahat ng mga micro argument 2. So I just like think of the levels first, and then we just rearrange them based on what needs to be said first, and how can they be collapsed into common themes that will serve as the arguments, and the banners and the levels can be different sub-arguments. So the banners can be separated into principle and pragmatic, macro, micro, inward, outward. So pwedeng argument 1, macro, argument 2, micro. Argument 1, parang for instance, inward, like domestic shores of the Philippines, like how will this affect the politics in the Philippines? Number 2, how will this affect Philippines' ability to navigate international politics? Mga ganon, di ba? Like, or pwede rin principle, pragmatic. So basta naka-collapse siya into 2 banner arguments, and then the levels are under there that are self-contained. So the levels can be sub-principles, sub-actors, sub-benefits, even if. So they can be like, oh, in this principle, I'm gonna champion beneficiality or non-maleficence in level 1, level 2, or whatever. So pwede rin sa actor level 1, the lumans level 2, the people in the city or whatever. Sub benefits like benefits on efficiency, benefits on financial benefits. So that can also be sub levels that you can use. Okay, so how do we make use of the time? So I hope this is clear. Now, what's levels? And I really think this is the meta of debate right now. I strongly feel that you adapt to this kind of thing, kasi that's how the world right now is. So I know that it might be difficult to think of these things really quickly, especially if you're starting out, but promise na, practice makes perfect. Like there's no other way to say it. There's no shortcut to knowing this and being good at it right away. You really need to practice and case build, and that's when you'll be quick enough to just think of like a lot of levels right away. Okay, so how do you now make use of your time if you're 7 minutes lang? So here let's talk about AP. So if you're AP, no, veto 0 to 5 minutes, points of context, that you think the points of context during 5 minutes and 9 minutes during prep, and then the timestamps here for the world that you have to defend, the arguments, and then intro. The intro should be written last because it should be written because you need to be able to understand the full extent of the frame already before you start writing the intro. So if you write the intro first, syempre hindi pa develop yung case nyo kasi wala pa kayong nasusulat. So you need to be able to write the intro last, and you need to write it word for word. So it's like the last minute of prep. Okay? So prep tips: do not write everything word for word, no? Except intro. Write in bullets and learn to compartmentalize your thoughts. You might divide building the arguments, but you must constantly be talking throughout the whole process. So if wala na talagang time, So pwede na si PM ang maggagawa ng building ng levels for argument 1. Si DPM can help the PM build the speech during the prep time and be the one to be in charge of building argument 2. But they need to be constantly talking so that you don't say contrasting stuff in your speeches. Before the prep ends, the deputy must already have 2 banner arguments and at least 1 or 2 levels before prep ends. Okay? So, ang deputy is gonna be like, it can be less on material and can be more on rebuttal, which we'll be discussing tomorrow. Somebody will be talking about the deputy lectures. Okay, so speech execution, we will be discussing these things as well. But just remember to demonstrate, mechanize, have counterfactuals, as in compare. Like if that's the case on your side, what will the case be on our side, and how is it any gonna be different? And impacts conclusions. So I want to emphasize that during prep time, you must already know your speech by heart because even if you're not able to um like even if you're lost in the middle of your speech, when you know your speech by heart, that's when you're able to just circle back immediately and still get back to the pace. Okay? So, are there any questions for first speaker lectures? Um, do you guys have anything like you can just chat if you're shy. Okay? Is there anything that you want to clarify about first speaker? I think now would be the time to do that as well. Ever. Okay. Okay. Somebody is framing more important than argumentation for first speaker? And I dedicate more time to the former than the latter. Okay. So here's my answer to that. Number one, framing is not a specific part of your speech that you need to dedicate your time to do that in a particular part of your speech. Rather, framing should be an thing that you should be doing all the time. The argument should be framing, the level should be framing, the rebuttal should be framing, because the frame is the overarching thing that you want to echo in your whole case. So it should be evident in all aspects of your speech, not just a particular segment of your speech. But I think in this context, I think that do you mean points of context, like framing within the points of context? It's not more important than the arguments. It's also not less important. It has to go hand in hand, really. So what we need to do is that the points of context should be like really an important part of the speech, but should not consume everything. So if you're framing with points of context a lot, then I think by 3 minutes or by 2:30, should already be starting with the arguments. So intro and points of context plus the burden push, etc., should be like 0 minutes to 2:30. Then everything else should be arguments. So that's how I would say it. Sam doesn't answer your question. But I get that it's confusing. But I want to really emphasize to guys, Hannah, frame is the summation of all the insights of your arguments. It's the strategy that you guys want to, it's the message that you want to send to the judge because it's the strategy by which you would win. It's the key insight summation of everything, arguments, rebuttals, even non-verbal things like inflection, choice of words, etc. So it's not a particular component. Like, I'm not gonna say now, okay, 1 minute I will frame for the whole 1 minute. Rather, it's a subtle injection to everything that you say, which eventually culminates to the lenses by which you want the judge to view the round. I hope that answers your question. Sam, is that clear? Because PM towards the direction they want. Well, that's why I was asking. Yes. Okay, thank you for that, Sam. Yeah, but definitely, guys, points of context are important. If you want samples, so I'm not sure if I've given this to a lot of people or like already, pero oh my god. So like I think like I know that I've distributed it to some people already. So I think that um if you want samples for points of context, we really don't have the time in the class to be able to dissect everything. But I made this G drive with all debate materials. So in here, debate briefs, no, parang lahat ng mga like you need to learn about debate, like the basics of debate, as in mga formats, like what should happen in prep, what is a fiat, how do I analyze a motion, what like strategies, etc. So ito, tapos ang speech structures naman all the structures from PM, LO, deputy, whip, reply, judging, yeah. And then here, crucial debate skills. So framing, strategizing, powerful intros, etc. So everything here is already here as well. And techniques per motion team. Ito, different types of motions. And also, there's some debate advice if you wanna read that. And I also put your sample speeches. So if you can see here, a lot of the sample speeches I have are gonna be like PM. So ito whip to, mostly whip kasi mostly whip, pero may mga PM dito. And you can use like may mga points of context dyan. So if you wanna understand like what I was talking about like in a more concrete manner, you can examine this. So I arranged the sample speeches as well, not per motion theme, like environment, feminism, whatever, because I think it's not very helpful because I think it's better if I arrange it based on common debate frames. So for example, like all debates were in the frame of your speech should be extreme actions are justified and necessary. So it's all here. So regardless if it's a culture debate, if it's a feminism debate or whatever, like a lot of them will have the same kinds of strategies to argue these things. So that's why I clustered it that way. So yeah, you can like check like ito probably PM ako dito for sure may points of context yan. So you can just check these out. There's like mga siguro 49-ish speeches here. Okay? So if you don't have access to this yet, I can send this in the Discord. But it's already in the Discord eh. So you can just go to the debate resources channel. Okay, so any other questions for PM before I go to the powerful intros and then we can move on to lunch after. Okay, I just stop share. Again, I know some of you have already listened to the same lecture, but really I think this needs to be emphasized over and over again. So you guys have a refresher. Also for a lot of you who are hearing it for the first time, I really think it's a very helpful way to approach PM. Not yung mga motion deconstruction, what's the stakeholders. I think that's very, it's not gonna help you win. And it's not gonna, like, I feel it's gonna stagnate your growth because I've seen debaters na who have mastered that very archaic format. But it's just that like the format is limiting their growth. Like they're not able to ascend to like the higher and more difficult aspects of debate already because the format is limiting inherently. It's not compatible to adjusting, readjusting, and it's very rigid kasi, right? So, ayun lang. With that said, I'll just pero tomorrow the lectures I'll give are mostly new or like that like I mostly made it from scratch. So yeah, so for those who have listened to these lectures already, please go tomorrow as well because you will learn something new as well. Okay, so now I will hold on just a sec. I will now okay. So the reason why I want to talk about intros right from the get-go is that I really find it parang not good when, and this is just my personal opinion, like I know that maybe some people might disagree and that's perfectly fine. Like I think that it's bad if like the debaters come into the round and say something like imagine a world where this and that, or closing government went into this debate and talked about that. So but it feels very mechanical, uninventive, and not really that strategic in introducing the best of your frames. So I feel that I really feel that intros are a thing that debaters should invest on because that's that will introduce their whole case, right? So that's why I want to give this lecture because I think I want to veer away. Like I want you guys to veer away from a very direct intro that doesn't really frame as well, or an intro that's very gus like imagine a world. So I think that let's tackle intros as well now. So now it's loading. I'm just gonna share my screen as well. This will be our last lecture for the AM session, and after that we will have a lunch and then go back for the PM session. Okay, so how to start with a bang, crafting strong intros. So here I want to emphasize the 7-second rule. 7-second rule. And this is an actual rule in psychology that people decide whether you're worth listening to or not in the first 7 seconds that they hear you speak. So once you lose their interest in the first 7 seconds, they're likely going to value your arguments less, or they're likely not going to feel that your contributions are very worthwhile in the round. And that's bad because when they already listen to the rest of your speech with that notion in their head, that you're not even worth listening to, they're not gonna value your argument so much, and that's gonna make you lose the round. That's um it might be that they will miss some of the arguments because they're not interested anymore, or they will not understand the full extent of the arguments because they no longer have the mental investment to listen to you. So it's important that that you have a strong start because it can make or break your chances of winning the round. Okay. Reviewing on framing. So we already know this. I'm gonna review that. Okay, so again, we already know this, diba? Introduction. Introduction must introduce the frame, which is the summation of the key insights of all your arguments, levels, rebuttals, context, etc. And the introduction must have rhetorical appeal. It must sound good. It must have an emotional pull. It must make the judges feel convinced that you are worth listening to. It must only take 30 seconds of your speech. If you're PM, probably 30 seconds. If you're like a whip, you're forgivable for having 1 minute. Like if you see like some of the samples whip speeches, they have longer intros because you have to reframe because a lot of things happen in the round already. And must always be prepared before you start speaking. Don't try to wing it. Okay? So you should not be winging it. You should be prepared on the intro because once you fumble, the momentum is hard to regather. Okay? So the elements of a good intro should have a frame. It should have the rhetoric. It must sound convincing, and it must have readjustment. If you are a whip or a deputy or any other speaker that isn't PMLO, or LO can also readjust, but PM of course not because you're the first one to speak. Okay, so 10 types of intros. So are you ready? Okay, so let's just dissect the types of intros that you can run, and I'm gonna defer to your judgment on what kinds of intros are best compatible with your personality as a debater, with your style as a as a speaker, and also what's compatible with the motion, with the round, with the case that you're going to run. So this is the intro that have actually been used in real tournaments. No? So the first intro you can use is something that's urgency based. Urgency based intros seek to highlight the frame that extreme actions or immediate actions are justified because the urgency is so high. There's something that needs to be done immediately, otherwise everything will end up to rot. Okay? So for instance, the motion reads, this house believes that vandalism or destruction of property of big companies responsible for climate change is a legitimate tactics for environmental activists to employ. So like Greta Thunberg destroying Shell's like infrastructure or whatever because Shell is causing so much global warming, etc. Ganon. So the intro and we are go. So the intro can be things like the panel, the clock is ticking. The better truth is we are running out of time to save the environment. The earth is literally burning because it is increasing a few Fahrenheit in global temperature, consequently making some areas in the Middle East unlivable. The last of the polar ice caps are melting, destroying the Arctic ecosystems. The sea level is rising and it's drowning small tropical islands like parts of Indonesia. Our forests are being stripped of its beauty and sustenance, causing the extinction of thousands of species and the endangerment of thousands more. So, diba, it's so it sends the message across. Maybe like if you're PM, it shouldn't be this long, but if you're deputy with something like this would really do. So it hammers in the urgency that islands are burning, polar ice caps are melting, and this highlights the urgency, which we can use to justify the frame that immediate actions like vandalism or destruction, even extreme actions like destruction of property. Now that would normally be contentious that would normally be contentious in a non-urgent scenario, but in an urgent scenario, they are necessary and they are very contentious. Very definite. Okay? So urgency based. It can meron pa pala thousands more. Panel the planet Earth is literally going to arrive at its maximum threshold and finally give up after years of negligence and abuse. If humanity continues to be complacent, negligent, and cowardly of taking extreme measures. Recognizing that this abuse to Mother Earth isn't brought about by individual people using straws or individuals not recycling. Notice that according to academic studies, climate change is brought about by businesses and transnational corporations such as clothing brands, factories, and fast food chains continue to exploit the environment for the sake of profit. Anyway, so yeah, urgency based. So It can also be a micro scale description, and this means that we're gonna use the experiences of a focal actor in a particular motion, and in order to explain and to frame why they should or shouldn't likely do an action. Ganon. So this house, as a progressive white woman in the USA, will refuse to hire domestic help. Progressive white woman ka, meaning that you value the rights of minorities. You probably know that domestic help is a job that's looked down upon and is really pigeonholed by other people in the USA because of bigotry, because there's an existence of bigotry in there. So yeah, and you're gov and we're gov. So we want to refuse to hire domestic help. So an intro could be like, if a progressive upper middle class white woman in Beverly Hills outsources domestic care and enlists a Mexican immigrant woman to wipe the puke out of her toddler's mouth, clean the stenchy fecal waste of her dogs, and wash the dirty plates of her entire family, that is when this progressive woman stops being progressive. Because although she herself was able to get away from the pitfall of getting stereotyped into doing household work, she is merely just passing the burden into a less privileged woman and thereby still contributing to the problem of women getting pigeonholed into domestic work. So, um, microscale analysis, again, analyzing a focal actor's incentives and psyche, and then framing it why it's bad for them to do a particular action or why it's good for them to do a particular action. Okay. Next can also be macro scale. So we're done with the micro scale where it's a focal actor. Macro scale is analyzing systems and analyzing how the systems have been actually good already, or analyzing how the systems have been bad and have been detrimental. And that can make a recipe for a very powerful intro. For instance, in a motion, this house would nationalize all financial institutions and we're gonna be in opposition. But nationalize means that it's going to be the government running them solely. And financial institutions mean banks, loaning, whatever. So it's gonna be like all land banks, diba? Like it's the government running it. And we're gonna remove things like BPI, BDO, Metro Bank, whatever. So we're gonna be in opposition, which means that we don't want this to happen. We want to retain private control over some extent of financial institutions. So the issue can be like, national hospitals like the PGH are massively overcrowded and understaffed. National insurance systems like the PhilHealth and SSS are often inefficient and are subject to major scandals as exposed by the Commission on Audit. National banks are still preventing certain poor people and farmers from opting into loans that could potentially change their lives. Kai, which was my partner at the time, was right. On our side, these nationalized financial institutions already exist, and right now, they absolutely do not work. So when you already have a defective system, the solution is not to expand the defective system's reach, but to run to other institutions that can perform the same function but have the less propensity to mess things up. So diba, it introduces the frame na private partnerships, private actors are better. And this intro introduces that by contrasting it with what's happening when it's nationalized already and how bad it is when you do that and you rely on the government to perform all these actions. So again, ito micro scale, diba? Like smaller experiences or psyche of a focal actor. This naman, it's a systems analysis and why the systems is inefficient or bad or already good or whatever. Basta systems. Next can be analogy. So analogy is when you are able to compare why something, draw a parallelism between two things, like one thing and the motion, and analyze in order to explain the trends in the motion and why the motion is so bad. So for example, this house as ASEAN would expel Myanmar until the Burmese military surrenders. So we know that ASEAN is an economic bloc composed by Southeast Asian countries, like 11, I think. And then Myanmar is part of ASEAN. But in Myanmar, a few years ago, there's a takeover by the Tatmadaw military, which is an insurgent group, and got control of the Myanmar government. So in opposition, so in the motion wants to expel Myanmar until the Burmese or the Tatmadaw surrenders. But we don't want that to happen in opposition. We want the ASEAN to still accept Myanmar, even if there are Burmese military in that country. So the intro, that analogy can be, dancing with the devil and playing with the fire requires you to step carefully lest you get burned. While the actions of the Burmese military are quite hellish, there are still rational actors who are likely to respond to economic incentives, provided that ASEAN does not explicitly antagonize Myanmar through threatening them with expulsion. So di ba, like the frame that we want to say is that it's like Myanmar is not irredeemable. We can work with the Burmese military, and this intro introduces that by analogy of dancing with the devil, because we're dancing with bad actors, we're negotiating with people who have gray historical characteristics and are likely to be bad and exhibit antagonistic actions, but at the same time still rational actors and would still be likely to help us if we negotiate with them. Okay. Um, Another type of action or intro rather is, what does this action mean? So meaning that you use this when the action is of the other team is very absurd, such that they're proposing a very weird policy or a very weird uh, premise or whatever, and your goal is to exaggerate how their action is so bad to frame how the judge should never feel that this action is even a feasible or viable thing to begin with. So I hope that's clear. So you're like blowing up the absurdity of their actions. Okay, so for instance, in the motion, this house supports the glorification of a progressive leader. So we're in opposition where we don't want to glorify. Our frame now is to emphasize how what glorification is going to look like, and why is it so bad and so hideous. So you can so this is now the action. What does this action mean? And the action in question here is the glorification, where um we're gonna frame this in a bad light. For instance, it can be like, when you glorify a world leader, you paint them in a filter of perfection. You deliberately choose to become blind to the skeletons behind their closets and deaf to the clamors of those who have been dismissed by this leader in order to maintain their popularity within the majority. When you glorify, you choose to believe that this leader cannot slip, stumble, or stutter in important decisions of national importance. And it is basically the messiah of governance, and his words are gospel that are automatically true, regardless of any sort of opposition. So diba, since our incentive is that our frame was glorification is nuts. Glorification is absolute bonkers. So we introduced that by defining what glorification means in a way that's framed that makes glorification seem bad. And the rhetoric that you use is good, so that as an intro it can be captivating to the judge. Okay. Next, comparative intros. So comparative intros is when you compare two things and you make it clear where the contrast lies and why one thing obviously is more superior than the other. So this house regrets the rise of care bots in the healthcare sector. So care bots are robots essentially that are designed to serve as nurse aides, as as people, as robots that actually help in providing hospital service. So now we're in opposition, which means we are okay with the rise. We celebrate the rise. We're okay with care bots being in the healthcare sector. You can say something like, PM lost his debate at the moment that he refused to engage in our best case. I think it's degrading to expect nurses, doctors, and other healthcare workers to be superhuman. At the end of the day, I need to sleep. I will collapse after a 36-hour shift. I am more likely to get snappier towards patients or make mistakes if I've been unable to eat the whole day. However, when I have the option of a care bot, I know that when I'm unable to continue on this shift, I need to tap out for a bit for my own sanity and for the safety of my patient, then Baymax can step in for me. So parang, it's a comparative intro, right? So what will it look like if there's no care bot? Na parang, I'm gonna be snappier. But if there's a care bot, like I can rest well, I will have better mental health, I can do my shift better. So the comparison is already clear in the intro. Okay? So again, I know that this first sentence is kind of like critiquing na your kalaban na para siyang katulad na CG won in this debate and talked about blah blah blah, but it's kind of different because you're linking this to how it's degrading that the PM said this. But yeah, don't say na parang CG won in this debate blah blah blah, imagine a world, like don't say that. I think that's like I would advise against that, honestly. I think there's more creative intros and that you guys got what it takes to like really make the intro flashier and more engaging. Okay, so another comparative intro is the rise of escapist. This house supports the rise of escapist media and art. So escapist media meaning art that's just used to escape the current ills of society. You're just meant to drown in that art so that you become happy and you don't sad. Now for opposition, we regret the right. So we don't want art for escapism. And you can say things like panel, art is supposed to be the liberator of the chained, the champion for the disenfranchised, and the stirrer of conversations that were silenced by powers that find introspection to their capital inconvenient. Unfortunately, um, side government wants to craft a world where art becomes a slave to capitalism, where art becomes subservient to the oppressive structures by generating apathy, and where art is counterintuitively enabling the abuses that it was bound to call out and police in the first place. So here, you're contrasting the world that you should have over the world that opponents should have, and that can also be an intro if it's a powerful telling device. Okay, and the frame here was that art is meant for something more than just escapism, diba? And that's echoed here. It's the liberator of the chain, blah 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 blah. Okay, so next is that likelihood analysis. You can use this to analyze if something like if the things that are being posited by the other team is really unlikely, then you can strategically use the intro to frame right away where it's super unlikely. So for instance, the motion reads, this house would make the heads of major governmental departments elected positions. So in elections, we would also elect the DOH secretary, the secretary, DFA, as opposed to the current model where it's appointed by the president. Okay, so since we're in opposition, we do not want this. We want to retain the status quo that it's the president that that appoints cabinet members. Effective governance can only be achieved if the people who lead together trust each other. If a president is from the Conservative Party and the Secretary of Defense is from a Progressive Party, it would be so hard for the president to trust the Secretary of Defense because he will think that his secretary is plotting his coup d'etat or is trying to find the right opportunity to strike him down as a president. The likely scenario is the president won't be able to trust the Secretary of Defense when he says that we should declare a war against an oppressive country or intensify the war against the terrorists because the president feels like the Secretary's advice is still with ulterior motives. So it's a deconstruction of likelihoods. Like, what is the likelihood if this thing happens on their side? And like, you frame the likelihood as if it's a bad thing. Okay? So, so the battle cry of the entirety of GovBench is that they want competent department heads. We want that too, but we cannot ignore the fact that if you open these seats for election, it's not going to be the most competent who will win. It's not going to be the best, the brightest, or the most compassionate candidate that will eventually assume office. The harsh reality is in the countries like the Philippines that is so prone to feudalist, capitalist, and misinformation agenda, the people who will get the power in elections are still going to be the hyper ancient political dynasties, blah, 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 blah. So next is that establishing an important actor. So you can also use this as an intro. For instance, if the stakeholders of the other team is not the same as the stakeholders that you want to protect. And now you're in the win, like the best way for you to win the debate then becomes fighting for why your stakeholders are the most important ones or the ones that should matter the most in the round, right? So in this motion, this House believes that agriculture-based economy should deprioritize adopting green agriculture and regov. So agriculture-based companies like Bayer or whatever, people that sell seeds or farming equipment should not adopt green agriculture. So green agriculture meaning eco-friendly practices in agriculture like solar machines that actually harvest crops or even pesticides that are very green and don't have harmful chemicals. So since we're gov, we want them to deprioritize adopting into green agriculture. Okay, so the intro can be farmers are the fathers of our nation. They put food in our plates and grains on our table. But the moment that we are blinded with the false pretense of environmental progress, and this aspiration comes at the expense of the people whose sweat forms the scaffold of an agricultural nation, this is when our country starves itself with compassion for the hand that feeds them. Diba? So parang, syempre, ang opposition nito, like their stakeholders are the general people on the ground that, oh, what about these people? Like, they need to prevent climate change for the general public. But since the gov strategy here is always for the farmers, like we should deprioritize adopting green agriculture kasi expensive, unproven, blah, blah, blah. And we need to prioritize farmers first over the environment, diba? So, like, it's wise that the introduction should seem something like this, like the farmers are the most important actors. Okay? And notice, guys, that the words that are used here are strong. Farmers are the fathers of our nation. Like, if this aspiration comes at the expense of people whose sweat forms the scaffold of an agricultural nation. Dapat ganun yung mga words, not just in intro in general, but in debate as well, especially in banner arguments. Like you need to use strong words like exploit, exacerbate, bastardize, because that's really part of, increasing the theatrics and the believability. Because sometimes it's not just a matter of what you say, but also a matter of how you say it and how convincingly you say it that you're able to convince the judge as well. Okay, so taking on burden. Um, okay, so the intro could also be parang biting a big burden so that your opponents will feel like so that the judge will feel like you're really engaging to the biggest extent. And this is the last slide, by the way. So we're already done. Okay, so sorry, it's not loading. Okay, so taking on burden. So when the opponent is good at burden pushing, or when you feel like your side has a really big burden that wasn't engaged yet, then you need to be able to put that in the intro, and it might be strategic to do that as well. So, for example, this house would ban criminals charged with heinous crimes to publish sensationalized anecdotes of their crimes. And for example, si Jeffrey Dahmer, no, was a serial killer, publishing a memoir about the things that he has done to all those poor victims. So we will ban that. But we are in opposition, right? So we will allow that. So, like, if you look at it, the liberal bias is already for government. Like they have the default liberal bias. Now we need to ban because they're serial killers. But in opposition, you have a big burden to prove why we need to actually allow them to publish those anecdotes, right? So since the burden is high, then you can think about putting that in the internet away. So it's crystallized and the frame is already clear. You can say something like, panel, if I prove to you that allowing these perpetrators of heinous crimes to publish sensationalized accounts of their gruesome acts actually change society in a beneficial and meaningful way, then closing opposition would take the first in this debate. In this documentary that I watched after a nightmarish aftermath of Jeffrey Dahmer's killing spree, a Colorado couple with a 9-year-old child saw their child exhibiting the similar patterns of behavior that Jeffrey Dahmer did as a result in a sensationalist portrayal of his crimes and life in the movie. As a result, they became cognizant and got their child checked by a psychiatrist. Again, so this was still before the whole Netflix Jeffrey Dahmer. This was an old example. But basically, it's taking on the burden why the publication of sensationalist anecdotes actually lead to good outcomes and preemptively good outcomes for people on the ground. So you can use this when the burden is really high. So again, recap. Everything else in your speech should not be written word for word. It should just be compartmentalized of phrases, bullets, and levels. But the intro is different. It should be the last thing that you should write. It should be word for word so that you don't slip and stumble, and for the momentum to be really consistent. Okay, and there are multiple types of intros that you can use, and you can use this according to how the debate went on and what's the need to be done in that particular time in your debate. Okay, so you can also personalize your intros based on personality, but I would really say that you need to be actually able to use strong words to convey very powerful rhetoric to the judges, because at its core, even like if you strip debate out of its complexities and levels, it's just a matter of persuading another human being to side with you, and a good intro with good rhetoric will really help you do that. Okay, so the types of intros you can run is urgency based, when you need to justify an extreme action or an immediate action because the cost of not doing that action is already too high. Micro scale description, like when you tap into the psyche and incentives of a focal actor. Macro scale description, when you demonstrate why the systems right now are so bad or so good, or whatever that helps your frame. Analogy is when you take something and compare it to something else so that it becomes easier to understand in the debate as well. What does this action mean? So if you need to mess on the model bash the action or model of the other team, you can use this to paint the action in a very, very bad light. Comparative intro, when you need to create a very sharp contrast of what looks with and without this action. Um, likelihood analysis is when you're going to analyze like what will happen on their world if that's the thing that will happen, or if the motion will be passed, or whatever in your opponent's side is, like this is the thing that's gonna happen and it's gonna be bad. And what else? Yeah, establishing an important actor. If you've already flagged that you and the other team will be fighting for other, different important actors, so you need to prove why your actor is the most important and vulnerable, and taking on burden. So if the burden push is good, or your motion calls for a heavy burden for you to engage, then you might consider using this intro as well. So with that said, just an exercise or just a motion. Anyway, so okay. Okay, so that's it. Does anybody have any questions for good intros? Anybody? Do you have questions for intros that you need to run? Or questions in general based on framing or structural reasons or first speaker structure about or intros as a whole. Any questions? None? Okay. So with that said, can we all turn on our cameras for a bit so we can take a photo before we end the AM session? Because some people may not be here anymore in the afternoon. I think some people signify they will only be able to attend AM, but also some people also said that they will be able to attend PM. So there's gonna be like uh, more people as well, I think. So let's turn on our cameras for a picture, and then we can have lunch and then meet again at 1:30 under the same Zoom call and Discord. Again, the materials are already uploaded mostly on the Discord, at the Google Drive, which is in the debate learning materials channel in Discord. So let's wait for the others to turn on their cameras if you can. Thank you, guys. Lovely to see your faces. I'm sorry I cannot be physically there to to some of you. And Bipsy invited me, but I wasn't able to go. Okay, so turn on our cameras. My God. Some of you I haven't seen in like a year. Like, hi Patrice. Hi guys. Okay, so that said, I'll just grab a quick screenshot. One, two, three, smile. Okay, somebody. Okay, guys, thank you for attending. I hope I still see you like later at 1:30 p.m. Have a nice lunch. Thank you.